Kenmore City Council is now in session. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Culver.
Present.
Councilmember Marshall.
Present.
Councilmember Sassen.
Here.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Here.
Councilmember Lutzis.
Here.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane.
Here.
Mayor Herbig.
Here.
All present.
Next on the agenda is our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Soxhawtl, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which we have cherished and protected since time immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working towards a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land. Now, if you'd all please stand and join me in the flag salute. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Unless there are any objections, the agenda will stand approved as published. Seeing no objections, the agenda is approved. Mr. City Manager, where is the fun?
Let's have Garrett Oppenheim answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Well, last Sunday, June the 30th, the fun was with the Kenmore contingent at the Seattle Pride Parade in downtown. We had about 15 members of the residents from the city here, including Mayor Herbig, go down and walk in the Pride Parade. You can see a couple pictures here. The city's van all dressed up for the day. And we're just reminding people that Kenmore is a welcoming city where all people love where they live. So we had a lot of fun this year.
I'm glad that the heat held off past this event. That would have been terrible, but it was a great event. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comments. We want to welcome folks to the council's meeting. Please address your comments to the mayor and the council. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Unless we get more than 20 people, then it'll get reduced down to 2 minutes. The clerk will call your name when it is your turn. Please state your name and city of residence and keep within the allotted time. To make every person feel welcome and safe here, please refrain from booing, clapping, heckling, yelling, and other interruptions. The meeting is being recorded for transparency. Thank you for being here and for sharing your input respectfully. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll begin with Jennifer Anderson, followed by Stacey Valenzuela and Patrick O'Brien.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Jennifer Anderson. I live here in Kenmore, and I just had a few things I wanted to talk to you about tonight. First of all, I wanted to give you an update on your lovely bike lane over on 73rd. I enjoy riding it almost every week. The only thing that I would really love to see is some upright dividers on that last right-hand turn that cars take as you're going north on 73rd. Every other intersection has the protected right turn for the bike lane, and that one doesn't. And that's where most of the traffic turns right off that road, and the bike lane is going away. So it would be super helpful to add that into our little study of how this is all going to work together. And I also wanted to say that the sidewalk on 170th and Juanita is looking amazing. The extension of that out from rhododendron. So thank you for that. And finally, a little critique. I rode my bike with my kid down to the Kenmore fireworks show this past week, and it was a lovely experience until I had to leave. And the biggest problem was that cars were parked in the bike lane all along 175th up to 68th. And so I was squeezing between moving cars, people who were walking back to their cars and parked cars to get out. And for a city that wants to be bike friendly and alternative transportation friendly, we need to think about those things when we have a big citywide event like this, where it would be super beneficial for many more people to ride their bikes. But if you don't feel safe getting out, like I'm a seasoned bike rider, and so I was able to do it, but it's dark. People are kind of grumpy. They've been in a crowd for a couple hours. They want to get home. And so if you don't feel safe doing that and the city hasn't kind of prepared for that, then you're not going to see bike riders. So just kind of a little thought as you go into further summer events. I was trying to think back to last summer when I also rode to the concerts in the park at St. Ed's. And that's a little bit better because just there's only one way in and out, and the parking is a little bit more contained, but just kind of something to think about in the future, especially for events at Log Boom, as that's a pretty jam-packed area when you put in a bunch of pedestrians and cars. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Stacy Valenzuela, Kenmore. I support the residents' strong request that any and all projects over $1 million or more, including the Public Works facility, need to be transparent, listing all estimated costs, full scope, without any hidden unnecessary extras. We'd like them on the ballot and then voted with the inclusion of people, you know, the residents of Kenmore. Anyway, we are still in recovery from the pandemic, but no, the climate crisis and affordable housing have needs now. I support the environmental steward residents' request of our council, which responsibly includes representing us, the people, to declare an environmental climate emergency in Kenmore. Between the number of MOTCA sites, loss of tree canopy, construction in our wetlands, status of our air, waterways, and soil contamination, we cannot wait to take action. Currently, the city has designated only 80,000, only 2% of the 4.1 million CCA funding expected from the state to Kenmore for offsets supported by requested implementation of city climate action plan. This is listed as the city council's second highest priority for 2024. City staff was designated twice that, or 170,000 for staff fund. Shouldn't the council fund their priorities? We need the funds directed to the CAP implementation, residents, environmental stewards, the governor's climate action, the legislators, K4C, People for Climate Action, PSCAA, the EPA, all called for decreasing greenhouse gases. Over 1 million or 73% from the CCA should be designated to climate action offsets. Sidewalks increase greenhouse gases as heat islands, just so you know. There is an objection of funding from the residents with no transparency or alignment with scope stated. Due to this, initiatives will continue to come forward. We desperately need a health evaluation, an air quality stationary testing and alarm system, and Lake Point tested, as well as along the Shyamish River, the slough, and the lake. Let's stop this nonsense. Let's be an example for other cities by taking climate action and putting it in implementation for correct offsets as directed by legislation. I call on you tonight to again declare an environmental climate crisis. Thank you.
Patrick O'Brien, followed by Karina File, Dakota Rash, and Tracy Bonashinsky.
Hey, everybody, Pat O'Brien here, Kenmore. Last week, Nathan said, oh, on the maintenance facility, well, it's good that the money for that isn't coming out of the general budget. It's good that that's going to have its own budgetary mechanism. But I'll tell you, Nathan, it's all coming off the back of the taxpayers. And that's what you got hired to do. And if it doesn't make any difference to you, whether it comes out of the general fund or additional taxes to the taxpayer, you got on the wrong horse, heading the wrong way. So that being said, is the Kenmore, where's the fun? The Kenmore Village Fountain is where all the fun is. That's the most fun you see in the city. My question is it safe for the kids? Is that fresh water, recycled water? Is the water recirculated, filtered in any way? Are there any health risks? That's something the city should know. We continue to spend money on private land, Lake Point. Rob Carl Lindsay is trying to commit us to years of more maintenance or deferral of maintenance and testing at Lake Point. That's total baloney. Last time we spent years having that equipment and that decommission of the old 520 bridge on that property. And guess what they said? Oh, we won't do this again. And we're going to do the testing then. And we're going to come up with a remedial action plan. None of that was done. And yet when Melanie O'Kane says, hey, let's do some solar panels out there, all of a sudden her voice was squelched. And all of a sudden, pop, up comes this new work for WashDOT with no public input, nothing, just bang, hit us with that. That's baloney. Staff education, environmental issues. Yeah, what training does your staff have at any of that? In Germany, you have a broom pod. The Native Americans had dirt trails. We could have gravel trails and not put concrete and asphalt down as a sidewalk in many places. And then that could also work as a dual use. When it's not being used for parking, it could be used for a sidewalk. There's no reason to have the scale of sidewalks that you guys want to put on every road. They're not used. And the young lady that said that bicycles take precedence over people parking with their families and walking down to the fireworks is absurd. You can walk your bicycle down there. Thank you. So once again, poor road design on Juanita Drive. There's bumps. It's misaligned. I'm still wondering about the boathouse concession where somebody would bid on that and actually win that. And the maintenance facility, of course, we all know that is a huge fraud. And I'm proposing that we keep investigating, and we will. Thank you.
Good evening, Council, Mayor Herberg. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight and also address some concerns I have. I'm really grateful the city is providing DEI education to you all. I believe that's a good benefit and something that could really help invest some insight to what many people in our community experience. So what does it look like when the council's character gaslights a community? The inability to talk about deeply affordable housing, or maybe even work on your #1 initiative on your council goals, that's pretty pathetic. You can't even have a discussion about affordable housing. That's concerning. We have many people who are about to be priced out of our community where their senior income doesn't match what's coming up with their next increase. That's disheartening. That's neighborhood gentrification, but that's okay when you gaslight it, nod at it, and don't do anything. It's your job to do something, especially if it's your #1 goal. But this council's used to doing that. You're used to looking the other way. Some of you are really comfortable with it. No on affordable housing. That's a choice. It definitely was feckless, but it shows some character or lack of that and the lack of ability to really address your community of which he actually said you were going to serve. When I look at our community we have here in Kenmore, and I think about some leaders who are sitting in seats in front of me today, I think about the kind of ways you spoke to community, whether it's towards your priority of what would make you feel comfortable, or whether it's speaking against diverse community members. I just ask you to be better, do better, and maybe work off of that checklist you have, because you're sure not getting it done. And it's really disappointing not to see active discussion active direction for our city staff and the level of staff that have been leaving Kenmore since some of your newly elections is really disappointing. I expect better of you.
We need your name and city of residence for the record, please. Sorry.
Sure. Karina Vile, Kenmore resident of 34 years.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Dakota Rash, followed by Tracy Bonashinsky, Dwight Thompson, and Elizabeth Mooney.
Good evening. My name is Dakota Rash. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park. Thank you, Kenmore City Council, for the opportunity to speak tonight. When it comes to climate, I think hope and urgent fueled despair are both important mechanisms. Unfortunately, I'm feeling the latter today, and so I invite you for the rest of my 3 minutes to kind of stare into the void with me, all in hopes that you declare a climate emergency. So 2023 was the warmest year on this planet in recorded history. When you look at the surface temperatures, Arctic temperatures, ocean surface temperatures, and ocean temperatures, when you look at those graphs, 2023 was what looked like an anomaly. It bumped up above all of previous recorded history. And unfortunately, that has revealed that it's no longer an anomaly because 2024 has continued that trend. That line has only sometimes dipped below 2023, but generally been higher. Definitely not an anomaly since it's continued already half the way into this year. Venezuela no longer has any more glaciers. There were a few remaining back in 2021, and by 2023, now they are all gone. Hurricane Beryl, currently tracking on the East Coast, is the earliest a storm of that size has formed. 11 lives have already been lost. Massive power outages, floods, and landslides are taking vital resources away from a community that has already been hit by these storms in the past and was not prepared to deal with a storm of this size so soon. The worst part of all of this, and that's not even the worst part, is that this is only a sample of what will come with unmitigated and unchecked climate change. This is a sample of exceeding 1.5, which this year has degrees of warming. With all current plans set on place, we are still not sufficient to limit warming to that level. We are looking at 3 degrees of warming or 4. So with all current plans, if all promises are implemented, we still might exceed that. And that's because these plans rely on fictitious things like carbon capture technology, which the prototypes haven't even been released. We haven't even really gotten to the blueprint stage. So we're proposing exceeding our carbon budget and emitting more with maybe the hope that we'll be able to bring it back someday. That is not responsible behavior. The responsible behavior that we look for from leaders like you all is treating the situation as it very clearly is, which is an emergency. Thank you.
Tracy Bonashinsky, Kenmore. Good evening, Council. I come before you tonight to urge you to declare a climate emergency. As you are likely aware, we are in the midst of a heat wave. A severe weather heat advisory has been issued for the central Puget Sound region with highs in the mid to upper 90s predicted through midweek. This is the hottest it has been in 2024 so far, with records likely to break over the coming days and then again and again before summer turns to fall. I won't spend time making the case that this heat wave is tied to the climate emergency we are living through. I think it likely that you agree, given that climate has been the number 1 or 2 council priorities over the past several years. I'm grateful for all the good climate work you have done thus far, and I encourage you to recommit and to accelerate those efforts, beginning by declaring a climate emergency now. One might wonder why an emergency declaration matters. Simply, the threat is so great and climate action so urgent that cities all over the world, including our neighbors Portland and Redmond, have declared climate emergencies even after years of climate work, including the establishment of climate action plans like our own. They acknowledge what a dire emergency we're in and how much harder they must work to be part of minimizing the worst impacts. Portland said, the climate emergency declaration makes clear that more actions and resources are necessary for the city to fully implement this work, and the next several years are critical if we are to meet Portland's climate goals. They declared a climate emergency in June 2020 after 27 years of documented climate-focused work. The City of Redmond declared a climate emergency in October 2020, establishing a goal of carbon neutrality for city operations by 2030 and other key climate and sustainability commitments. Their declaration acknowledges this climate emergency as a threat to human survival, which it is, and frames necessary actions that match the scale of this threat as climate change consequences escalate as they are. Year after year, we make insufficient progress to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Every fraction of a degree matters, and we are severely off track. The time to do something about that is right now. Kenmore has a part to play, and I would appreciate your leadership in stepping things up on our behalf. Thank you so much.
Dwight Thompson, followed by Elizabeth Mooney.
Good evening. Mr. Mayor and council members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Dwight Thompson, and I live in Kenmore. My talk is more of a prep for action on the council's priorities coming up next week, which I believe several of my fellow residents have discussed already. Allow me to commend the City Council for making the Climate Action Plan a first priority, and with the affordable housing, the second priority on your docket for work this year. I do believe that it's time to increase the emphasis and standing of our shared climate crisis. Just as we cannot allow a residential crime wave to happen here, nor allow substandard housing putting at risk our citizens for fire or earthquake. We must take action on climate action as an emergency. So I believe the emphasis for our council for climate as a current and pressing, urgent and emergent issue that requires enforcement of our environmental standards that are set and that still need to be developed. An example is the Home Builders Association perspective that tree preservation ordinance would result in the widespread inability to improve homes and build new ones. Really, what is our priority? In accepted strategies for climate action, there is affordable housing. Sounds like the HBA has suggested that affordable housing would require reduction of our tree canopy. You heard about regional, national, and global crises tonight. I don't need to repeat them. And I think and I trust that all of you, if not most of you, completely understand that. I just want us to do what is needed here in Kenmore to make the hard and right decisions.
Hi, Council. Elizabeth Mooney, citizen of Kenmore. I sent you an email last week because of SCANSA saying that they're coming to Lake Point. I was shocked, depressed, and what I'm asking you now is, can you assure us that the staging by SCANSA, WashDOT, will not pose a significant adverse and environmental impact? If we don't have a leg to stand on because our attorney said that when we sent off the demolition elsewhere, when 520 Bridge was planning to bring their arsenic light and decking here. We said no. Can we do that to Skansa? And I want to say I support Tracy Bonazinski's, Dwight Thompson, and Dakota Rash's comments. Why not go green? You know, back when Janet Hayes met me at our Perk Stream Fest at Rhododendron Park, she was looking at the trees that were being taken down at Lake Point. That was back in the Shoreline Master Plan when I served on that as a volunteer, where she would come in with Ann Agard's suggestions and say, you know, there's a wetland out there on Lake Point. Talk about green. That place is now filled with gravel, gravel, gravel. So maybe that was too long ago for you to know, but if you look back on the old pictures, there were trees there. That's how I met Janet Hayes, who is the reason, in large part, that we knew that arsenic was going to come to our backyard here in Kenmore. So anyway, yeah, maybe we could put together monitors to find out if the barges are going to be turning up the sediment and stirring it up. But you know, I had this all here to say. I'll just say. Last week, we received a surprise in our mailbox, a postcard from the giant company Skansa with WashDOT and the return address stating the company is coming this month to Kenmore to stage the 520 project on our shoreline in Lake Washington, the private property known as Lake Point. I was shocked. I realized that this is their attempt at public outreach, but it sure seems like the horse has already left the barn. I realize it could be a NIMBY issue. It is. Kenmore has become the place where people send their problems. We make their asphalt, we make their concrete, we build their bridges. And all this holds up our vision of our lake, our shoreline becoming a magnet for people. And we don't want the industrial problems, I don't think. To make the vision happen, we need to increase our transparency, reduce the surprises, maybe get some cameras out there. But can you assure us that this is not a significant adverse environmental impact? Do they not even need our permit? I think we need to get some answers before they arrive at our shoreline.
Mayor, that concludes on-site public comment. Can we move on to virtual?
Of course.
Thank you. We have one virtual public commenter. Give me one moment. Nancy Hansen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Mhm.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Nancy Hansen from Kenmore. I'm also in support of a national or a Climate Emergency Act, and that would be based on the 1976 National Emergency Act, and with the goal to get a message to the president who can act if we can get enough communities together to do that. Looking over the 84 national emergencies declared since then, there don't seem to be a whole lot that are true emergencies. So I don't know if it's been misused or whatever, but a lot of them are regarding sanctions. And so it seems like economic issues that could have been solved in a different way were used through this emergency act. But one does stand out as being a true emergency, and that was President Clinton's declaration of a prohibition against nuclear weapons. And that is still in effect, which is hard to believe. And the only one that even comes close to climate as far as emergency status. So anyway, the Green New Deal lists the goals that should be included in a climate emergency. I think that was connected at the time that was brought up in Congress. We see a lot of work being done on half of the 12 that they had listed, like the obvious housing and transportation greenhouse gases. But the other items too that should be brought up as equally important are, the ones that we don't talk about as much, like farming, with 30% of industrial farming practices causing causing 30% of the emissions total. And I don't think that's common. Well, we just concentrate on one thing, and we should be using, doing something about our food system as well. I guess I'm going to just give you a few examples of things that have come up with me recently that I can't seem to get out of my head, and they have to do with toxins in the environment. And yeah, it's just hitting home. And I think a lot of people will realize that these things are happening now. First, my grandchildren, their ages 18 to 23, announced at Christmas, we aren't going to live as long as our parents. And the parents didn't have anything to say, actually. And what would you say, you know? And then my cat was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, something that didn't exist a generation ago. A corporation has capitalized on the treatment of this, just like some of the companies that would treat cancer. They are in Shoreline where the workers actually do the treatments and care for the cats, but the doctor is in an office where you can only talk to her
Thank
from
you.
Oh, I'm done. Sorry.
Mayor, that concludes our list for this evening.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who came out today and spoke. We just lost our city manager. I was going to ask him briefly. Okay. Mr. City Manager, we've been hearing from folks over the last little while about the usage of Lake Point. And I was hoping that you might be able to clarify just where things are. I know you've spoken with all of us, but I think for the public's sake, it might be helpful to have a better understanding of what's happening and kind of the permitting landscape around that, if you could.
Sure, yeah, when we heard that was coming, we consulted with our permitting folks and also our city attorney. And the conclusion was that they didn't need a permit from us because it was already an established use on the site over the years. But what we can do is we can provide even more specific answers on our Lake Point website. And I can have Samantha Loyak, our Development Services Director, work with the city attorney in getting the precise language on there and explaining why they didn't need a permit from us and why it's an allowed use.
I think that'd be really helpful for the public. I know that I was, when you told me the news, I was unhappy and frankly shocked also. But I appreciate staff's work to be as transparent as possible, to have the information so that folks can find it. So thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda stands approved. Next, we've got a study session working with our biases. We're going to move down to the study session area for that. And just a note for everybody too, when we're done with this training, we are going to take a 5-minute break. We'll staff reconfigures things a little bit out there. So. All right, like I said, this is a study session, a training, working with our biases, anti-bias training presented by Betsy B. Miller, consultant and principal of Workplace Resolutions. Betsy, it's yours. The floor is yours. Oh, or Garrett, if you'd like to kick things off.
Thank you. I was just going to quickly introduce Ms. Bemiller. We're fortunate tonight to have Betsy Bemiller with us. Ms. Bemiller is a consultant, facilitator, trainer, coach, and mediator in employment and workplace issues. Working in the area of employment law for over 25 years, Betsy has consulted with organizations on policies and procedures, conducted numerous assessments and investigations, and provided coaching and training in all subjects protected by state, federal, and tribal laws. She's collaborated in delivering trainings in leadership development, workplace effectiveness, mediation, dispute and conflict management, and resolution, communication, perception, and diversity. Betsy serves on mediation panels for Dispute Resolution Center of King County and the King County Alternative Dispute Resolution Program. She's involved in social and racial justice initiatives, and tonight she's here to present an anti-bias training for the council.
Thank you, Garrett. And thank you for the support in bringing tonight forward. I've watched you on some of the previous meetings, and so it's nice to be here. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time and really showing the commitment that that really follows with your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I wanted to start by just making a few connections. It was a pleasure to work with the staff a few months ago in similar subjects, supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility, and also being able to observe Shannon Kelly-Ray's work with you on the equity framework. I've worked with Shannon Kelly-Ray before, so I knew of her work. I had worked with her in her work with the state of Washington, which I worked extensively with the agencies and the executive branch, the judicial and the legislative branch. So it was a pleasure to see the work that's been accomplished in your policy and the framework and all of that. And I would say today, when I think about your policy, we're going to really connect with the policy and the work that actually goes back to March 13th, 2023. I don't think all of you, it's kind of hard to see everybody's face when you're watching those recorded. But I think some of you were not and some of you were, but you all are familiar with the framework. And just bringing back a little bit, where Shannon Kelly-Ray talked about blind spots. And as part of the framework, you may also be reminded in the moment that two things in the framework in the questioning have to do with the personal side, the individual part of a framework, equity framework, and that those two questions were, have I made any assumptions about my cultural identity, genders, abilities, identities, and or background of those impacted by my decision? So she brings up the aspect of assumptions, cultural identity, and then a variety of different groups. Number two, and this is again part of the framework on the personal side, is my own personal experience, culture, and or background preventing me from understanding and taking the cultural issues of marginalized stakeholders into account in deciding what issues exist for those disparately impacted. So that's directly from your framework. And I would say we're just dropping into that framework, that particular part, to build on your strengths. Now let me, actually, Steve, you can probably follow me. I think that'd be easy. Steve is my partner. So it's Betsy B. Miller, pronouns she, her, and Steve B. Miller supporting me in all things around the work and our lives. I wanted to, so we've drawn, the focus here on the commitment to the DEIA, and the training is built right into your policy, right? It's built in there for staff. It's a commitment. It's part of what you have in your plan. And in terms of the role of the council members, I just went on the website a few weeks ago to just reinforce in my thinking. I heard again in March of 23, the focus on your roles, establishing city policies, enacting and amending city laws, adopting the biennial budget, appointing citizen boards and commissions. You serve at large, and your priorities. We heard about them before I came up here, so I won't be redundant. I will just, again, connect with equity, your DEIA focus, and those subjects and priorities that are directly related to your DEIA focus. So looking at those priorities then, and our work today then is really, I want to acknowledge the vulnerability of being in a fishbowl and being on camera and all of that. That's a little bit different. I've done it a few times. I've been in this kind of situation, but I know it's different because my tendency is to want to make it safe enough in the room that you can really share openly. This is a subject where we don't need to go very far to see how people interpret and how their biases and their lenses look at everything you say. And then, that's just part of the equation, is understanding other people's biases as well as your own. And it does work very well. So I'm not going to be asking you. In fact, what I'd like to do is really present more on the front end with asking you for quick connections and work on the personal side in the materials that I've provided for you. Should be in front of you. Does anybody need a pen? You should probably need to make a little bit of note. Well, we all work with computers and everything, so pens are not always with us. My goal here is to move to the second half of how I'm seeing our focus, so that we can open things up a little bit more, making some connections and getting some input from you on parts of bias. We're going to look in several dimensions here. So what is bias? And I pulled again from, maybe I can be here so I can see what's up here. You'll notice in your packets, the definition that's coming up right now is in your policy. So we're using that one first, and you can see prejudice in favor or against. So we want to think about bias. Today, we're looking more at the negative kinds of biases. And I'll tell you, my background, professionally under my Workplace Resolutions LLC, balances with my community work in employment. Positive biases, well, we'll look at different kinds of biases, but favorable biases are sort of the other side of the coin that can cause a lot of damage or marginalize others, certainly. So we want to keep in mind the full dimension of bias. And then unconscious bias, implicit bias, if you'll notice the description here, attitudes and stereotypes that influence judgment, decision-making, and behavior in ways that are outside of conscious awareness and/or control. And the one thing that you'll find if you read very much about implicit bias, unconscious bias, is kind of depressing. You don't know what you don't know. So give up. You can't access it. Well, I've never felt that way. When I work with people for all of these years, 35 years of helping people have conversations about prejudice, about bias, about differences, whether it's community or in the workplace. And the study to be that person who can be in the room and balance the powers, the different levels of power in the room, and always exploring bias. We have the potential, I think, to unearth many, many of our biases. I think it's well worth acknowledging that there's a lot that's within our sort of computer files that we don't know. And if we could go back and look at every moment of our lives, we could probably find out a little bit more. But it's layered and it's just there. So we're acknowledging that. Now, cultural identity. I want to get you involved a little bit in your own personal work here for a moment. Shannon Kelly-Ray was alluding to cultural identity in the background, you know, when I saw her working with all of you in this framework work, the equity framework, thinking about cultural identity. So I'll just let you read either up here or you'll see that in your materials where we are. That would be page 3. So cultural identity really does identify us in terms of many dimensions of our backgrounds. And I'd like you to just take a moment and think about, and I've asked on the paper here, on your materials, note aspects of your cultural identity, just jot down a couple of things that would be part of who you are, what you recognize in terms of race, religion, nationality, ethnicity. We could add so many more dimensions. And then as you jot down aspects of your cultural identity, think about at least, can you describe a value or a belief that you grew up with? So I'm asking that, you'll see that is number 2 on that first half of page 3. So I'm just gonna be quiet for a moment, let you think about aspects of your cultural identity, who you are, what you recognize is true about you. You are unique, you are different than others. And this is part of the value of recognizing when others are coming from a different place and have a different cultural identity. Well, if your cultural identity is your lens, you might recall again, I'm just connecting a little bit with where you've been before. The lens that you see the world through is going to be, if you think of it, based on that cultural identity of your own. And what I have found through the course of life and moving from place to place or different, you know, different chapters in my life is that the more I read about others, the more I realize what I don't know about my cultural identity. And that speaks also to, I'm just living life, coasting along, but that lens doesn't help me. So part of what we're thinking about is the deepening of awareness. So you can see the closing out here about furthermore, as we deepen our awareness of our own identity, we empower ourselves to recognize the unique cultural identity in others. So this is critically important as a foundation for looking at bias or really working in support of what we're talking about with diversity and equity and inclusion, all of our subjects. And I would just ask you, I don't know if you can just, without having to put your mics on, but just a little bit of interaction here. I put, you know, what are just a couple of the factors that influenced you, that have contributed to and shaped your identity? So when we have in here, some of these, race is going to be something that is, you know, it's there. We could talk about that the rest of the time. But how about traditions, beliefs, and values? What do you recognize besides family? We know that as we grow up, family are going to be influenced, or how we grew up, whether we grew up with our own families or with grandparents or with other kinds of environments. But what do you recognize that contributed to you kind of developing that cultural identity? How you see the world?
Grandparents being immigrants.
Say that again.
Grandparents being immigrants.
Thank you.
Also, the other side, immigrants on both sides of the
Thank you.
line.
Thank you, thank you. Grandparents as immigrants and learning about and seeing the world through what was shared. So both parents, being working parents, are going to contribute to some of the value systems that you grew up with, the messages that were either spoken or not spoken, how the environment was around you. Have you thought about media? Have you thought about television, movies? I think that when we think about all the untapped implicit bias, we're really not necessarily fully aware of all the messages that we took in along the way, whether it was in school, obviously, in different chapters, but also what were we exposed to, whether it was books, media, entertainment, all of that. So we're going to anchor in personal. Yes.
Just gonna say generationally, and for lack of the better term, I do identify largely with a lot of stereotypes and overgeneralizations connected with Generation X. And then media, you mentioned, wow, they showed us a film called The Day After at Kenmore Middle School. It was after class, but it was eighth graders, you know, showing us about the horrors of a expected nuclear war. And that probably helped a lot in infuriating, you know, overzealous youth.
Thank you. Yes.
I think we're going to go into this, but, you know, like my cultural identity was, I mean, I think influenced probably by some of the things that you just described, but as like part of the majority, you know, the white majority here. I don't think, I never really considered myself having a cultural identity. And even if I were to say that, there's a part about it that we all are individuals, right? So you can be of a culture, but, you know, you're not necessarily fixed by that. But it sounds like that you dispute that in a minute, but I'm curious about that.
You just really talked about these three areas, which is some of us are not, we haven't considered the different aspects of our identity. So that is very true. And that's a myth that we don't have one. We do have one. We just, sometimes we live life in sort of that place where we're not as exposed to, or it's not necessarily that family members bring up. There's so much past or history that some of us don't know about when we came to the United States, or what decade, land grants, you know, some of us just find out a little bit as we go. So we have that. And cultural identity, a myth is that cultural identity is fixed. I think we all can think back to some things we grew up understanding from the values that were around us that we perhaps are rethinking or have rethought. And also I can tell you from mediating siblings on estate matters that you can grow up in the same family and have very different values, even generationally, or 7 years apart or 10 or 15 years apart. Your experience is different even within that family. So we can think of cultural identity as something that is somewhat solid and somewhat not readily accessible to us in our understanding, and other things that are shifting and changing and growing, and all of that. And of course, the one thing that I think about is that the myth of our own culture, our own cultural identity is mainstream, which is something that sometimes our assumptions are that life is like I've experienced it. So that's more about, the more I read, about different individuals that have a rich and really write about a rich cultural identity, the more I realize way more to this. What do I not know about my own? So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. We're coming up on the video, is that right? We're going to be looking at 4 entry points that will help us look at bias and that will also, I see this as a kind of adding to the framework of a toolkit. So these will be tools and strategies that we can look at different entry points. And as an introduction, I think this 4-minute video kind of lays the groundwork for this. Now, before we play the video, there are several biases that I see in this video. It is presented, it's from UCLA. It's from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The bias is one of coming from a researcher's vocabulary. So all I would say is I didn't stop and go to the dictionary on some of the words. I kind of had a sense from statistics and doing the, just reading the articles that I do and all of that about research. So don't let that get in the way, but I think you'll appreciate some of the messages here that we're going to connect with in breaking down where are these entry points and what can we do instead of what do we not have access to. Okay, it doesn't have sound until after.
In Lesson 1, we learned that schemas apply to people. Without any conscious thought, the instant we see someone, we assign them to salient and chronically accessible social categories, such as age, gender, race, or profession. Once we tag someone as belonging to a particular group, our brain automatically activates a cloud of information that we've come to associate with that group. These associations then potentially influence how we think about and interact with that person. This cloud of associations includes what social psychologists call attitudes and stereotypes. An attitude is an association between a category and an evaluative valence, either positive or negative. Attitudes are like gut feelings, a general like versus dislike, hot versus cold, thumbs up or thumbs down. We hold attitudes about all sorts of things. For instance, you might have a negative attitude toward large rats, but a positive attitude toward plump hamsters. A stereotype, in contrast, is a more specific association between a category and a particular trait. When you think of the category snakes, you probably think of the trait venomous. We know that not all snakes inject toxins when they bite, but there's a strong association nevertheless. Stereotypes also apply to people. Some groups are considered athletic, whereas others are assumed to be good at math. Some groups are seen as natural leaders, whereas others are seen as natural caregivers. Take me, for example. When you see my face or read my last name, your brain hashtags me as Asian, and the attitudes and stereotypes you associate with that category are automatically activated. If you have a positive attitude toward Asians, you might smile at me just a little bit more when I approach you at a lunch table. If you think Asians are good at math, you might be a little more inclined to hire me as your accountant, but not your lawyer. If you think Asians aren't athletic, you probably won't choose me for your pickup game of basketball. We call attitudes and stereotypes biases because they represent information that diverges from some neutral point. Explicit biases are attitudes and stereotypes that you know you have because you can just ask yourself what your feelings and thoughts are and get an answer. By contrast, an implicit bias is an attitude or stereotype that you have no direct introspective access to. In other words, asking yourself for an honest answer doesn't tell you what you need to know. Where do these biases come from? Why do we associate certain attitudes and stereotypes with some groups but not others? Well, think about how you learned that snakes are venomous. Or think about why certain smells or foods give you a warm feeling of home. It's through exposure in a particular context. Sometimes that exposure is through direct contact. Other times it's through secondhand or vicarious contact, mediated through stories, books, movies, social media, and popular culture. It's no different with people. Pause for a moment and think about your attitude toward Native Americans. Also, what traits do you associate with them? How did you learn all this? Was it through direct interaction? If it was more vicarious, how accurate and representative do you think those exposures were? Because we are aware of explicit bias, we're often mindful about checking them for accuracy, appropriateness, and fairness. Most of us actually strive to revise our prior attitudes and stereotypes on the basis of better information. But this sort of self-correction doesn't go on with implicit bias because we don't even know we have them. Unfortunately, there's increasing evidence that implicit biases, even though they operate invisibly, influence our actions and decisions in small but consequential ways. Still curious? Skeptical? Don't miss Lesson 3, Real-World Consequences.
Thank you, thank you. All right. Now we're going to draw threads from that video in terms of the entry points and being able to kind of capture some of what was said there and look at what can we do rather than what is hidden from us. So we're going to start with, we're on page 4. And just to introduce you to these entry points, looking at stereotyping, looking at unconscious bias, looking at prejudging. So now we're into the part in the video where the focus was more on attitudes. So stereotypes, attitudes around unconscious bias that feeds into, that fuels or creates the behavior, some of which we know we're aware of and some of which we are not necessarily aware of, that others might see us. They might see an exposed bias where we might not see it. And then bringing in the part about discrimination is really about the differences or about marginalized individuals. So behavior can be part of that act of discrimination. Now we're going to look at the first 4 parts as we move forward here. So here we go for entry point 1, stereotypes. Now, as we look at stereotypes, I'm just going to ask you to participate in just a brief exercise here about possible stereotypes. So I brought up, we're going to use, just for purposes of our work today, here are 5 different areas, and you can see by cultural, we're including national origin, indigenous peoples. Social can be the generational, it can be social classes, it can be any kind of group. And then we're bringing in racial, gender, and religious. So I'd like to have you take a look at the next page. And there's a grid to look at on page 5. And then statements are up here. So just for a moment, it's interesting because when I first started using this in some of my trainings, the article that I saw these in had one selection for each one. As I started delivering trainings to different groups, we would get more. So I'm going to be quiet and just let you do some check marks. This is for your eyes only. I'm not going to ask you, only by volunteer if we can follow. So let me be quiet for a moment and let you read through and just mark your pages with whether you think cultural, social, racial, gender, religious might be part of someone saying. So this bias coming out. Now, what I was thinking here is you can just call some of these out. We won't go through every one of these, just a few of these. But if I start with the first one, "You're so articulate" might be a stereotype around what groups? All of them?
To remind folks to use their mic for folks at home. Thanks.
It's a funny one because it is really a compliment, like to eliminate "you're so articulate" from our language because it may be offensive due to a stereotype is really sad, you know? I mean, like, what if it's genuine? Like, you're such a great public speaker, you're so articulate, your communication fits here, and now I can't use that in language anymore, which, you know, I might still do it anyway, hoping that someone would understand that I was giving a true compliment about their style and ability rather than being offensive, right? You know, and it's a really tough conversation, and I think it's something that's really important in language today. You know, how can you provide a compliment if the language that's there is going to be taken as insulting?
Thank you, Councilmember O'Kane. I have a thought, but I would like to go over here. Councilmember Sassoon.
Sasson, just so you know.
Sasson.
I just want to suggest that you can use the word articulate by saying, "I appreciate the way you articulated that. How you articulated that spoke to me."
So the context makes a difference. These, I've got a few more that I can read out, are patterns that different people experience. So this one came more from African Americans. So thinking that the stereotype is that, so you might feel definitely that somebody is stereotyping and talking down to you. If you provide the context, then that might change the situation a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate too, because someone could tell me that I'm articulate, right? And I don't take offense at it, right? And I've been given that compliment and I take it as a compliment. But we have to be mindful how we use it, who we can use it with. You know, being mindful of the structure of language, how we're allowed to speak today, you know, without offending, you know, it's really challenging, the limitation of language and not wanting to step into a pit, you know, a pothole. And I'm just saying it out loud because I think this is what the challenge of this conversation is how, you know, we can go through this class and be like, "I really did think you were someone else," you know, on the next one. You know, it's an interesting, a couple of them are so nuanced. I just think it's an interesting conversation that I won't belabor it, but I just wanted to speak to that.
Thank you. And you heard me say before, I want to kind of move us to the point where we can talk about what if somebody says to us and biases up here.
I was just going to say from my own personal experience, I've received this comment many, many times based on my age, the generation, from a lot of folks of a different generation, almost always of an older generation. When they hear me speak, they say, you know, "You're so articulate," with that assumption that younger people are not as articulate as, say, those of a different generation.
Thank you. Thank you. Wrong person is usually around race, national origin. So being able to, one of the areas of unconscious bias and implicit bias when you do a little bit more reading is that the implicit bias testing that is out there, and then the subsequent research indicates that how we grow up and who we are more familiar with is how we're going to be better able to differentiate facial qualities, characteristics. And I've erred before in thinking two people in my classroom called both of them the same name. It's just more likely to happen, and that's one of those things that we may not be as aware of as we think about things. So this is about awareness. It isn't necessarily about you can't say this or can't say that. In fact, I'll read you a few others from another article. Now this is just, I'm just going to pause and read these out, and then we'll move along to our next entry point or our strategies also. Old people are forgetful. Men are better at math than women. Police are racist. Minorities get jobs due to their minority status. French people are arrogant. Women who marry older men are gold diggers. Dumb jock stereotype. Macho man stereotype, passive woman stereotype. Rich people are heartless, poor people are lazy, and on. So I think really what I was thinking about more and more, and what I try to do is just be more aware of what the stereotypes are that are out there that we can recognize. There's a lot written right now, so you can be more aware of what are those stereotypes that really, I think media, social media, and so many angles of information that's out there that people are just getting all these messages, and then it's coming through as applying to one person that which we have limited involvement or engagement or knowledge of. It really is. Now, it goes back to exploring our history also. So can we look at the stereotypes that we're familiar with and go back to the cultural identity aspects and look at how did I learn this? If you are aware of them, what are the messages? What are the beliefs? What are the attitudes that flow up that you're aware of? So recognize the narratives, meaning the story behind it. If you're leaning in that direction, you can ask yourself some questions. Have I really thought about that? And I think this is work that's ongoing. This can just continue and continue. And as you make it part of your life, maybe together, of exploring different kinds of stereotypes that we're at least aware of. And then awareness, you're halfway there. You could say, okay, am I leaning in that direction? Am I influenced by that? And should I look a little bit more? So we can think about that. And we can initiate inquiry, meaning where did it come from? Do I still believe that? Do I need to inquire more? Do I need more direct experience rather than indirect? So you can see under initiate inquiry, what's the origin? That's where I go first when I really sense that I'm influenced by some kind of broad message. Where did that come from? What's the origin of it? And then there are other questions that I can follow with there. All right, let's move to bias. Entry point 2. All right, so if stereotype is something that we can study, we can be more aware of, we can broaden our thinking, we can choose to inquire, and we can look at our cultural identity, then moving to bias, then we can also be aware. I have pages of different kinds of biases. I chose to bring 3 here, but it's automatic. So a lot of what happens with unconscious bias is that it's kind of in the basement. And it's all the sum total of all these different messages that we've received along the way, that which has influenced us, that which is noted, that which has been an impression on us, and they're just there. So the more we can kind of look at these biases, I think that does help. So affinity bias, if we're looking at affinity bias, the tendency to favor people who share similar interests, backgrounds, and experiences with us. Any comments about affinity bias and how you see that playing out?
I mean, it's second nature to relate to people who you can relate to, because of a shared background or other things that you share with them. And it's easier to do that than it is to step out of your own shoes and, understand where other people are coming from who have a different experience, I think.
Just letting it, the silence sit for just a minute here. I think that affinity bias is profound in its influence on us. And it's not, I keep thinking, Council Member O'Kane, I keep thinking, it's not that we don't want to connect with people or appreciate that we may have similarities or know the same people. I know, if I were to talk about affordable housing and all the work that I've done for different, it's going to affiliate with somebody, or, we need those connections and all of that. But we can do better at saying, okay, we're moving in this direction, we're hiring this person, or we're appointing this person on a committee or whatever it might be, or making decisions. Is it? It's number one if you go back and study labor statistics, and this has been true from the 80s, and that is we tend to hire the people who are most like us. We tend to promote the people that we have affinity with or that we have more. Yes.
I mean, how much of this do we think comes out of, almost lizard brain level tribalism that, it's just not baked in, but is, just part of our hardwired programming that we need to be actively work against? Because it's, as the video said, we tend to categorize everybody that we see into various buckets. And we do tend to, associate with folks who, 5,000 years ago might have been in our tribe.
So part of what we're looking at in the toolkit then is being conscious of it and pushing ourselves back a little bit and slowing down the lizard brain, the amygdala, that fast track. A lot of this is about how fast we're moving, how fast these connections happen, how fast the pressure we're feeling, and not being able to stop, pause, reflect. That's a theme. Anchor bias, yes.
Yeah, I would say I think one of the most important types of bias or unconscious bias is political bias, our judgments of people that aren't on our side. I just think that that's probably one of the most unspoken about biases, in addition to cultural biases and the other things that we're speaking about. Red state, blue state, Republican, independent, Democrat, you're not on my team, so you can't. They told me you're a racist, you don't support gay rights, whatever it is. That kind of bias without actually taking time to listen to our neighbors and see what we have in common, I think is one of the most important that we start to recognize, because I think that is breaking up our nation.
Thank you. Labels, categories, painting with a broad brush. Yeah, you can see the anchor bias, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is another one I would say connects with what you were just saying about the labeling. Only paying attention to information that aligns with your existing beliefs. Focusing on evidence that confirms what you already believe instead of considering all the available information. Relying on stereotypes or personal biases when evaluating information. remembering information that supports your views and while conveniently forgetting. And I don't think it's convenient. It's just how we're back to the connections that we make, forgetting or downplaying information that goes against them. So having strong emotional reactions, positive or negative, to information that confirms beliefs while remaining unaffected by information that doesn't support them. So this is a big one. Now, when we think about the toolkit strategies, then I think we've got we do want to slow down. So, you know, recognizing the automatic responses and slow it down. And they're talking about some particular times, making decisions during meetings, meeting a new person, when tired, hungry, angry, late in the day, under pressure. You can start to think about, when is it important and when isn't it? Because we can't spend all of our time. We've got to make decisions. We've got to move forward. We can't get stuck in, do I have a bias? What do I do? But when are the times that you're more apt to perhaps get swept into the automatic, the lizard brain, right? Is that what we brought up? I mean, we can refer to it different ways, but the shortcuts. And that's really what books are written about, is the shortcuts. So can we identify those? And then here again, we have the stop, pause, and reflect. And that was brought up again earlier with your tool, your framework. It's amazing what we can do even in the moment, under heat. And I've now watched a few of the meetings and I've been here today. It's that kind of energy is going to affect you. People feeling passionate and all of that. Breathing is wonderful. And you can re-engage the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, the brain that we need to be able to stop and not get swept in and have the biases just take over. But being able to pull in as much air as possible, hold it and release it slowly 3-4 times, not to be confused with heavy sighing that might affect others, but we can do that anytime, anywhere, and that's going to reconnect. That's going to help us, and that's a strategy that I think identifying when we're most vulnerable and susceptible, and then the breathing. All right, let's look at the next entry point. Interrupting prejudging. So we heard about attitudes, prejudging. Now this is something, as a mediator, learning about mediation in the early 90s, I was wanting to be very conscientious. And part of learning how to be a mediator is understanding that you are supposed to be a neutral. What is that? Right? Not unbiased, impartial. So this has been a long journey of how do I work with bias? Because it's not just what I think about my biases, it's how are other people experiencing me? Because if I'm going to help balance power, and if there's going to be a resolution or a discussion that resolves, or a lawsuit that settles and comes to an agreement, then my part is ensuring that the parties are heard, that there's balance, and that no one feels that I'm on their side or that one's getting more attention than the other. So what I started to do as I got more competent in the process and my skills in listening was to double check my thinking when I started to, it's like there's two parts to your head. It's what you're saying out loud and what your thoughts are doing. And as soon as I started creating the negative judgments about the person talking or the body language of the other person, as soon as I started to recognize I'm starting to my messages in my brain are negative. Now, I'm not going to say out loud, these negative messages are going on in my brain, right? This is something that I had to work with in the moment and say, okay, it's happening to you. Now, what are you going to do with it? And for me, it was really about, I want to be of service. I want this to be a balanced. I don't want to interfere. I don't want to be the reason this doesn't work. So I'm going to work darn hard at slowing it down staying curious, being patient, and seeing how this person continues. And if I need to ask more questions so that they can be more transparent about what their assumptions are, what's behind whatever they said that I started to judge. Now that's even has worked in working with ground rules. So in the workplace, we might have two participants that want to have, or they're motivated to have a conversation. They've had a conflict in the workplace, and they're both from the same background, national origin, different cultural identity than mine, a little bit more lively, interrupting each other, kind of louder voices. And my co-mediator on the break said, I think we need to stop this and really remind them of the ground rules, which is our identity, right? Our cultural identity. And just make sure that this is safe and it's gonna feel respectful. I said, how about this? How about we go back in and we check in with them and see, does it feel, like you're getting, this isn't working for you because it's feels like you're getting beaten up, verbally or whatever. So let's check in with them. It could be that it is working for them. And sure enough, as we checked in, they said, don't change a thing. This is what we've needed for 5 years. And they worked through it. It just wasn't in the same style that we might have been. Be nice, be respectful, whatever. All right. So how do you know? Is anybody willing to say, how do you know? What are the subtle facial or nonverbal behaviors when somebody starts to develop a negative thought? We're much more aware of other people's expressions than we are our own. I can tell you that. What do you notice?
I'm going to explain mine. I don't necessarily know that I notice them, but I pull back, I look down, I nod my head, give some sort of a cue usually, but I usually can feel it when I do it.
Rolling eyes? Looking away, down, off to the side.
It's a little cold in here.
Probably, right? Move your attention someplace else. Walk out. You can catch it in the moment, and you can say to yourself, do I really need to go in this direction? Or can I suspend that for a moment and listen a little bit more and see if it, if I learn more? Usually the more that I expand those pieces of information, it usually then moves in balance and we can move away. But we can also reframe things and say, gosh, I wonder what this person, what their experience was that really is behind what they just said. So again, checking the narratives that are going on. It seems like a lot in the moment. I do think it's fairly accessible for us to be able to recognize when those negative judgments are happening. So let's go. Behavior. This is where, and I'm noticing my countdown here. This is where I thought that we could look at a couple of aspects of behavior. Now I brought into the conversation the definition or some aspects of micro inequities. So I'll just give you a moment to either read on the screen or on your page. So that's page 9. But really, the examples earlier were examples of what we're talking about with micro inequities. So if we recognize that bias is going to show up in behavior, which is easier to work with than when it's working on us and we don't see it represented in behavior. So there's a lot that says the unconscious bias does affect our behavior. That's more recent kinds of research. So we want to get as much as we can from noticing our own behavior, others' behavior. So some strategies here about this aspect then, we want to look at three things. When I recognize my own behavior, and two, when someone shares with me my biased behavior, and when I recognize biased behavior in another. In the moment. So this would be when I recognize my biased behavior. So I think I have an example here also. And I have the privilege of being able to do a lot of training for the last 3 years virtually. So I get chat-ins in the content of my virtual training. I'll get 20 people chatting in answers to these kinds of questions. So it's been amazing. How do we know? What would I see in others if I said something that they perceived was inappropriate, disrespectful, offensive? They know, class after class after class, they're putting in the chats. It's the eye rolling, it's the, they'll move away, they'll shut down, they'll stop the conversation, they'll get very quiet. So we know that. So if we know that what just came out of my mouth, now that I heard it, I recognize that didn't come out so well. Now, some of us just hope nobody noticed. Just keep going. It is an opportunity to stop and say, that didn't come out the way I had hoped. Let me express my intention. If we clarify our intention, and I would say, Council Member O'Kane, going back to what you said earlier, if I provide context. So if you delivered, you're so articulate, and this person had body language that said, oh, really? You're talking, about that? You didn't think I could be articulate because I'm much younger than, let me just express, I genuinely really appreciated how well that was put together and how well I was able to understand it. So we can express our intentions, or we can simply say, oops, I'm sorry. That wasn't my best self there. So we can apologize quickly. People appreciate that. If we've learned something from it and we don't repeat it, that's all they're looking for. If we can be specific, that's fine. Or just acknowledge. It doesn't have to be a big apology. Does that make some sense? All right, now, if we look a little bit more, when someone shares with me my biased behavior, well, facilitating conversations around conflict and around discrimination and bias, most of us get pretty defensive. It's natural to want to defend and protect. You didn't understand. And really what we're trying to say is, I'm a good person and you're accusing me of not being a good person. That goes back to personal identity. The more that we can, we've talked about cultural identity. A part of that is saying, I am a good person. I see myself as very respectful, and yet sometimes I say or do things that are not experienced by others as being respectful. And I can accept myself in that place. So the more that we can, and if we don't know what we don't know, then don't we need other people to give us a clue or a cue now and then that there might be something of what you just said or did that might have a seed in bias? Are you willing to take a look at it? That takes trust, doesn't it? And it takes some skill. Or else we're back to the labeling that you were talking about. Hitting a hammer on something just takes us back to shame or embarrassment, and then we don't grow or learn. I clicked right through that, but you can see it when somebody shares with you. You have a couple of choices. In the moment, if it resonates, if you see it and you understand it, you can own it and say, gosh, you're right. Thanks for bringing that up. That really wasn't what I intended. So, this is more of what I think. If you don't understand it, say it. I'm confused. Could you help me understand? Now that could be off to the side. It doesn't have to be in that moment, but you've got a choice to say, I don't get it. Can you help me? The hook's going to come out. All right. They both told me.
According to my clock, you have 5 more minutes.
All right. All right. I'll take it. Thank you. All right. So, oh, you looked it up, didn't you? It's okay. Okay. Just for the third one. You notice another. Well, when I recognize biased behavior in another, this is just one strategy. I'm a conflict resolver, I'm a trainer and coach in communication skills. There's a lot of different ways. I've always been impressed with the idea of being, a little humility goes a long way. I think back to somehow I was influenced in my early years by Columbo. It's unconscious, but I'll just say, like, I could be way off base here. I could be totally wrong, except I never am dirty. The dirty trench coat. But if you go back and look at his persona, he's always right on, but he's unassuming. I noticed this. I could be way off. You correct me if I'm wrong. And if I've gone out, it works every time. People are willing to look when we're not hitting the hammer and saying the label.
I'm curious though, I see, I guess maybe it's in a different context, but I do see women doing this more. And it may not be in the context of bias, but just qualifying themselves before they say something. And I do think there is
Yeah, there's a point there.
something there.
Well, if we can be specific, you can own it, right? I noticed. If you can be specific about what you're talking about rather than a global label, you just did a racist thing or whatever, but be willing to describe it. And then ask for clarification allows the person it gives them a chance to kind of acknowledge it and see what their context is, where they're coming from. So asking for I'm wondering if you could clarify your thinking. So I think what we are doing here is, what are the assumptions that you're making when you said that? Now, if they can talk about the assumptions, then you can kind of look at what are the biases that might inform those assumptions? Have you taken into account this or this? So that can take you into a more developed conversation there. All right, group. Now, another way that we can practice anti-bias is simply by paying more attention to affirming others. So that goes back to the negative kind of the judgments, the thinking, the stereotypes that are pulling us over here. If we stop and we're thinking about different ways we can affirm, different ways we can support, and our attention is in that direction, then we're going, it's another way of thinking about this. So, and it can be as much as paying attention, bringing your full attention, reading, smiling. I saw it, I watched a month ago's meeting. And one of you did a beautiful job. I can't see who's who necessarily, because it looks like that. But there was a motion and then nothing. And then during the conversations wrap up, one of you said, I thought that was in this category, you know, so-and-so brought this motion up. I appreciate that. I don't think it's time yet. I would like to wait and see if we can have more information on that. And so that was affirming rather than dismissing, rather than the other side. Is there one thing that you think you could take away for yourself individually? Is there one thought about how these tools can support your council work together? Any thoughts before I am pulled off with the hook?
I gotta use more of the breathing. I think that's great. And then something our mayor said, which is like, nobody comes in here to try and make the city a worse place to be in. And I just get so wrapped up in like thinking, yeah, I know the right way to do this. And I'm pissed if they don't agree with me. I mean, that's gonna be counterproductive and it's not right and it disrespects everybody, at some point when it goes too far. So I'm gonna try and deal with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was one of mine as well. And then I think calling us out on our nonverbals for, not just with each other, but, with people who are coming up for public comment. It is awfully easy sometimes to tune out when we're uncomfortable, or at least I should just speak for myself. So yeah, to try and not do that. I mean, that's not always easy.
Thank you.
I'm synthesizing, so I'm sure there's something in there, but I just want to say you're really good at your job. This was a great presentation. I think you facilitated this really well and, worked with our comments and feedback, mine, because I was just playing a little bit harder with this, just trying to break it open. I just think you did a great job today. So thank you. I'm thankful that you're here to facilitate this for our team today.
A pleasure. Really a pleasure. You're doing amazing work and there's a lot of opportunity to help each other. And one thing, unless there's a last minute comment from anybody else, Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote Nonviolent Communication, and it's used in a lot of different settings. He said, anything that comes at you, vitriol, passion, anger, you have the capability to only hear that this person has had some experiences, that they've experienced something, they have some feelings and emotions, and indirectly, sometimes it's in between, there's a request in there. And you don't have to take it on, but you're striving so hard to really be more transparent, right? More transparent. And as you think about bias, one of the great ways of working with bias is to make your discussions more transparent. I assert this. You could ask each other, how did you get there? What assumptions are you making? What's the data? Where's the background for this? And as you can provide it or ask each other for it, I think you will have a little bit better, or do it, in other kinds of conversations as well, whether it's with others, asking them to be more transparent, or with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break for staff to reset the tables. We'll come back at, we'll be on recess, let's say till 8:50.
For you. I told you, it's much easier for me to do 5 days of training or 4 or 3 or 2.
Kenmore City Council will return to order. Next on the agenda is a business agenda, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, strategic action plan, and 5-year roadmap, annual report presented by Assistant to the City Manager, DEIA Coordinator, Garrett Oppenheim. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, members of the council. I'm pleased to have with me up here from the DEIA Advisory Committee, Juliana Pooley. She's going to be helping out with the Equity Toolkit, or she's actually going to be presenting the Equity Toolkit training after this. For now, we're going to start out with an update on where we're at with implementing the DEIA strategic plan. So in the plan, it says that we will do an update once a year. It's been almost a year since the plan was adopted. And so here we are tonight, excited to tell you about all the great work that the staff is doing. Just for a bit of background, this all started in 2020 when the council adopted a resolution asking the city manager to develop and implement a DEIA policy. That policy was adopted in November of 2022. And then in September of last year, the strategic plan was adopted by City Council. And this year, implementing that strategic plan is the number 5 priority for the City Council. Around the time that the plan was adopted, the DEIA coordinator was added to the duties of the assistant to the city manager position. So here's sort of an overview of the work that I do in that role. First, you see DEIA implementation, and that for the most part is working with the different departments. We meet quarterly. Started out meeting with just the department heads, and then over time that's evolved and join department meetings each quarter and go over the things that they've done in the last quarter and what's going to be happening over the next quarter. Also the liaison to the DEIA Advisory Committee. They also have quarterly meetings. I help in creating the agendas for those meetings along with city manager and the 2 co-chairs of the committee, and helped to organize the Pride Parade participation just last week. See that we do a lot of events. We've had tables at both Juneteenth celebrations last year and this year, the 25th anniversary celebration, Pride flag raising, and multiple Love Where You Live events. And also help to organize the trainings for staff and city council that we've had in the last 6 months or so. So beginning with the implementation overview, like I said, we do the quarterly department meetings. I have a DEIA implementation planner board, which I'm going to show you in just a minute here. It has cards for all of the initiatives that were on the plan that you adopted last year. Like I said, I'll show you that in just a moment, so I don't want to get too in depth on that now. We've added new initiatives over the last year, or 1 so far, working on the Municipal Equality Index to get the city ranked and scored by the Human Rights Campaign. Working on a non-discrimination ordinance, and we're trying to put together some performance metrics to go along with the initiatives, and hopefully next year that should all be in place for you to see.
And Garrett, on the Municipal Equity Index, you've submitted everything. You're just waiting to hear back, right?
That's right, yes. I submitted all the material to be scored. I just, for whatever reason, they haven't gotten back to us yet. Hope I reach out to them every other week, and hopefully we'll hear back soon. Thank you for pointing that one out. So this is the implementation order. It's a screenshot of it. As you can see, each of these squares is one of the initiatives that is in the plan. They're broken out, they're labeled by the department that's responsible for it. So if you're working in, say, the Development Services Department, you can easily go through and filter out only the initiatives related to your department's work. And you can go through and see what's been assigned to you, what things are in progress, what's been completed, and so on and so forth. And it's been an effective way of tracking it. And I just want to give a shout out to Maura Query, who introduced me to this app. And it's just been an incredibly effective tool, and would not have known about it if she hadn't presented it to me. So I want to go through some highlights of what has been done over the last 10 months since this plan was adopted. I'm going to go through goal by goal, starting with the first one, leadership and operations, which reads advance pro-equity practices and systems at all levels through accountable leadership and employees who are also empowered to lead and be change agents. So as you see, we're going to go through here. We'll see some of the different initiatives that are in the plan and then just some of the things that have been done over the last year. I'm not going to read through them all because everyone has access to this PowerPoint. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me or to the DEIA committee, and we'll be happy to answer those. As you can see here, one of the first things that we have is that we have the DEIA Advisory Committee. They meet quarterly and they assist the city manager and staff with issues that come up. We've added language to all of the RFPs that we put out. They talk about our social justice values and equity practices. We post all RFPs and jobs to the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises. Development Services is updating online forms to make it more accessible for everyone in the community. See, we're implementing the strategic plan. We did a survey of Kenmore employees. That was the Gallup Q12 survey last year. And steps have been taken to address issues that came up in that. We've been working on that over the last several months. Conducted a statistically valid survey for the community over January and March of this year. And we're doing a follow-up survey that's been sent out to some of the lower income census blocks to gather additional data.
Can I add to that?
Of course.
So the two statistically valid surveys we had done were to registered voters, and not everybody in the city is registered. So what we did is we've sent out a follow-up survey that kind of blends the two surveys together, and we've sent it to all of our lower income census blocks and to every single residence in those census blocks. And we should be getting the results of that survey in the coming weeks.
You can see here that we're doing DEIA trainings for new employees. We did an all-staff training in April that was about all of the policy and the plan and the things that you all adopted over the last couple of years. And there was also that equity toolkit training that Shannon Kelly Ray did for the city council in March of last year, which is recorded on YouTube. And so new employees are watching recorded versions of those. That takes us to goal number 2, ensure that our plans, policies, and budgets advance the city's DEIA policy and strive to eliminate systemic inequity in Kenmore's organization and interface with the community. Now, the big one here is related to the comp plan. And you can see that policies throughout the comp plan address DEIA, and there's a cognizance of equity impacts when drafting new sections. The DEIA task force, which preceded the committee, reviewed the housing element of the current comp plan. We had, in developing the climate action element of the comp plan, the Cascadia performed an equity assessment informing that. And the DEIA Advisory Committee reviewed the Housing and Human Services Community Needs Assessment Plan, DEI statement, and initial findings. You can see that we are now using the Equity Toolkit when writing policies and other documents. Another big one was 2.2.3, think outside the box to bring more people of diverse backgrounds into policy discussions. And the Love Where You Live workshops were a huge way to implement this. They brought out a lot of people from the community who were able to share their views on different topics. We had 4 of those workshops last year, and then there was also the Love Where You Live events just out in the community over the court at farmers markets and things like that last year. We are our advisory committees, which are all equity minded. They bring together different community members from different backgrounds and experiences. And we're trying to provide Spanish interpreters at all of our different live events. With budget season coming up here, this is a big one as well. Provide a budget development process that's transparent and open. And of course, we had the Financial Sustainability Task Force that just completed its work. And it did that openly. It reported to City Council, and they used a variety of different media to solicit feedback from the community. Goal 2 has some things about supporting local businesses. Here we see that we have the new business directory at findkenmore.org. Businesses have access to their listings. They're able to edit those and promote their events and such. The city continues to host monthly meetings with the Kenmore Business Alliance here at City Hall, and is helping to plan Oktoberfest events here in Kenmore this September. The Skate Like a Girl and Skyhawks have both been going on again here in 2024. We'll move to goal 3, which is related to the workplace. Invest in having a pro-equity organization and inclusive workplace culture for every employee. We did an anti-harassment training in January. That was part of our all-staff mandatory training series. DEI issues are regularly being brought up in the leadership and expanded leadership team meetings. And the expanded leadership team itself was created in 2023. That's a DEIA initiative that encourages cross-departmental relationships and communication, helps to spread messages across the entire organization.
And that expanded leadership team also grows the people in our organization. It has a career development component to it as well.
Absolutely. You can see 3.2.4 there, advertise positions through diverse outlets. We've done a lot of work over the last 6 months or so, investigating how we can make positions more widely known to different diverse communities. We've made modifications on how to advertise positions. We're still trying to figure out whether we get more diverse candidates applying by posting on sites like LinkedIn that have a wider access, or through more targeted advertisement on smaller platforms. In order to determine this, we're hoping to start collecting some demographic data from applicants. Goal number 4, advance our education and communication to better engage our residents and communities in ways that are inclusive, culturally responsive, and socially just. And we make sure that on the website, everything is accessible. We use fonts and colors that are able to be seen by more people. We have translations into Spanish for as much material as we can. We have the user-way tool that is for accessibility. You're going to get a demonstration of that later this evening. We're trying to put more QR codes on things to make it easier for people to access information with their phones. And Development Services has created and uploaded a tutorial video online that shows folks how to do special event permitting. Hoping to do some more of those videos as we go along. We have our proclamations calendar for the year that helps us to celebrate diverse cultures. And we've added a lot of signage at the parks to help educate people. And of course, last month we had 2 big events. We had Juneteenth, which had about 2,500 people in attendance at that day at the farmer's market. And we did the pride flag raising on June the 1st, which brought out about 50 people from the community. Moving on to goal number 5, develop facility plans and improvements responsive to the values and priorities of residents and stakeholders and achieve pro-equity outcomes. So you see that we have the pedestrian facilities plan and ADA transition plan that have been completed. The ADA plan for replacing sidewalks and curb ramps is underway. We continue to have a traffic calming policy and local road safety plan. We're going to have more buses and things like that as construction is going to begin next year for Sound Transit. And we have lots of information on the website about different transportation programs that are available to the community. Goal number 6 is promote an integrated holistic system of public safety, justice, and human services that focus on healing and recovery. You see that Chief Moen is planning to meet with the community later this year. We are taking full advantage of the community court, and we're sending as many low-level offenders there as possible. And we have the RACER, the Regional Crisis Response Agency, that is being used on calls that are more about mental health than crimes being committed. The Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, that is, they are all wearing their body cameras now. And the department was able to bring back the Nurturing Trust workshops and held 6 of those in April of this year. Of course, continuing the Lunch with the Cop program and other activities in schools. Continuing to hand out prescription drug bags and gun cables here at City Hall. And this is where our new initiative was added. It's 6.1.20. It reads, utilize KCSO Language Access Program grant funding to provide front desk interpretation services to limited English-speaking communities via face-to-face interpreters through on-demand video and audio interpretation in over 240 languages, including ASL. And this has been a great way for, to make people feel welcome when they come to City Hall. We have a tablet computer. They can talk to, have translation through that with the police or with front desk staff or anyone here really. And the police actually also have an app on their phone that allows them to communicate in different languages with people out in the community. And finally, we have goal number 7, housing and human services, provide access and referral to housing and human services aimed at meeting the basic needs of all residents. We have a Housing and Human Services Manager who's been hired in the last, just over a year now, Tamby Cork. And we completed the Human Services Needs Assessment early this year. Results were released in the spring. And at the July 22nd council meeting, the final report will be presented. We have our two ARPA programs that are related to human services, the Mental and Behavioral Health Counseling Program in the schools through Center for Human Services, and the Homelessness Outreach Program in partnership with Lake City Partners Ending Homelessness. Those programs have both been very successful so far. The 24/7 Crisis Center that Kenmore took a lead in helping to develop is going to be opening later this summer. And we have the Holt property, a couple doors down from City Hall here, that is continuing to be developed in partnership with Imagine Housing, with more coming later this year with that. And at the farmers market, we continue to accept the SNAP and EBT benefits and hope that will continue going forward next year. Move on to talk a little bit about the DEIA Advisory Committee. There are currently 10 members on the committee, all of whom either live or work in Kenmore or both in some instances. The chair and the co-chair, they plan the agendas and they facilitate the meetings. We have topics suggested by the city manager, myself, and other committee members. And all the members on the committee have expertise in this field and either life or work experience in DEIA. The committee meets quarterly. They get department updates. Usually one department will provide some updates to them at their meetings about what they've been doing in terms of DEIA. They discuss other issues affecting the city, and they sometimes get the chance to meet the community. For instance, the JEDI group came in April. The JEDI are a group of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders at Arrowhead Elementary who do a lot of community projects, very civic-minded. JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And these girls are, it's all girls in the group, pretty much. They are remarkable. They have such civic pride. It's incredible. It's really fun when they got to come in and meet with the committee. The committee also they come and they volunteer at events. They were at the 25th anniversary, Juneteenth, the Pride flag raising, and the Pride parade. And we had some members come out for the Love Where You Live. They've been a great resource to the staff. We send them questions that come up, and like for instance, I mentioned before the issue about where to be posting jobs and things like that. What's the best way? We send them questions about that, and we get back fantastic answers, and it's been really beneficial. Then we also have the DEIA trainings. So we have the mandatory staff training series every month. On the first Monday of the month, staff gathers and we do a training. In March and April of this year, we had DEIA themed, Betsy Bemiller, who you all had the chance to meet before. She came in March and did a training on implicit bias. And then in April, I gave a background on all of our DEIA documents that we have in the city. And Shannon Kelly Ray came in and did a training on the equity toolkit for everybody. For new employees, we did a recording of that training on the background materials, and all new staff are watching that. It's about 15 or 20 minutes. And anyone who deals with policymaking is being required to watch the equity toolkit training from last year that Shannon Kelly Ray did. And of course, you guys all got the anti-bias training tonight, and we'll be getting a training on the equity toolkit again. And that's all I have for you all. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? Councilor Sassen?
2 questions. Well, one, thank you, of course, yay. My question is about gathering demographics on applications and what a subtle knife that is. And I just wonder if you're leading with a transparency statement or how you're doing that.
Well, we haven't done it yet. And so
Right.
that's something that we're still working on. And that's kind of the issue, is that we want people to know that we're not tracking, for any nefarious purposes. It's not going to be linked to your name or anything like that. So it's a bit of a tricky issue, and that's why we're still working our way through it.
Yeah, all power to you. I'm curious to see how that goes. And then, so yay. And then my second question was, can that translation tablet be made available for people who want to attend council meetings?
I will ask. I don't know the answer to that question.
Any other questions? City Manager?
Just a comment, if that's all right. Yeah, so we have two really great resources to help us with this. Number one is the DEIA Advisory Committee. They're absolutely fabulous, and they're a diverse group of people, and they've come up with some really great ideas. They've pushed back. They've helped us think through some things. They've produced their own community events, and so I do see them as a group of people that I rely on to help us with issues and to help us think through policies. So just really happy to have the committee, and they meet quarterly. So and then the second resource is Garrett. So as you can see, this is to track all this is a big task. And Garrett, as you probably know, is funded temporarily with ARPA money, or formerly ARPA money, through the end of this year. But this DEI work is a body of work that obviously needs to continue beyond the end of this year. So we got to figure out how to continue this in the next budget. So just want to publicly say thank you to both the DEI committee and Garrett for their outstanding work on this.
Deputy Mayor?
I did come up with something. I thought it was interesting how you're looking to compare outreach for job postings, and I'm guessing you may have this on your radar or already have done this, but I'm bringing it up as a Port of Seattle employee and someone who's familiar with some King County and City of Seattle recruiting. And at the Port of Seattle, in my department, we also do go out to minority resources to post, as well as whatever other options that the port uses as a standard. There may be organizations that have been doing this work that have deeper figures for those assessments that you might be able to use as a resource as we're looking at it. I think at a minimum, posting at those resources is a statement of good effort, right? Like it's saying this matters to us. So I think that there is value in saying that, but I think the statistics, we might be able to look at other regional resources to see how it's going for them with that sort of recruitment. Thank you. Also, thank you. This is a lot of big work, and we've made a lot of progress since we've initiated this. And so it takes staff and the committee to help us get where we are. Yeah, and I'm not going to belabor it, but thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Sassen.
Just one more thing. I know I've said this publicly before, but I want to reiterate that DEIA is really the lens through which I believe all city policy should be considered. And you really demonstrated this evening that that is happening to the best of your ability. And I will do what is in the best of my ability to continue to promote that. So thank you.
Can I add something?
Of course.
I'm sort of like the face, I'm up here saying this, but the work is being done by the whole city staff. So I want to make sure that's very clear that this is something that every single person in here does. When we did the training in April, everybody was in this room, and I went through initiative by initiative, and I said, if you've worked on this, please raise your hand. And I don't think we got more than 5 initiatives in before everyone's hand was raised. So it really is something that everybody in the city works on.
As it should be. Deputy Mayor?
I keep coming up with all sorts of questions. For new hires, is that like an online training since it's off time from, or?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
For new hires, since they're required to do the training, do you use a webinar sort of format for that training? Or does someone come on site to provide the training? I was just curious how you do that.
It's all recordings on, I think they're all on YouTube.
Any further questions? All right, next move on to staff reports. DEIA Equity Toolkit Training presented by Assistant to the City Manager, DEIA Coordinator Garrett Oppenheim, and DEI Advisory Committee members Juliana Pooley. And are we going to have Mariel Metapor also? No? Okay.
Mariel is ill tonight, unfortunately.
Okay.
I will turn the microphone over to DEIA committee member Juliana Pooley. Thank you so much, Juliana.
Thank you, Garrett. Can everyone hear me?
Mhm.
Good, okay. Like Garrett mentioned, I'm one of, I think there's 10 other DEI committee members. Ideally, we would all be sitting here, the room would be packed, you'd see a lot of diverse faces, ages, abilities, identities, a little more rich and robust than how I appear tonight. So I just want to give lip service and appreciation that we have really fantastic work and discussion. And I was able to work one-on-one and do some brainstorming how to lead this training tonight outside of just Garrett and myself. So hopefully all of you have either participated or watched a training from Shannon Kelly Ray previously. And so today will be an equity toolkit round 2 for most of you. So the equity toolkit is a set of 13 questions designed for you, city council members and city staff, to reference and discuss when making decisions for our cities. These questions aren't yes or no, and so I'm not going to be asking you to vote on anything, but they are meant to discuss, they are meant to promote thinking, growth, inclusive discussion. And so this is the part of the night you have been lectured, you have been fed, you have done a lot of introspective reflection, and this is the part of the night when I get to sit back and you all get to talk. So we won't be tackling all 13 questions, but we will be touching hopefully upon 8. And what we really want to lead with your thinking at the beginning is, how has the equity toolkit been helpful for you this past year? And if you're new to the city council, how has it been helpful for you in the 6 months since you've been elected as city council? And if there's been some glitches where it hasn't quite been helpful yet, how could the equity toolkit be more helpful to you? If that's a change in your behavior, if that's a change in how it is designed, how can we have this discussion? So as I hope you're all familiar, this exercise of training, this isn't just hypothetical. This is where we take a live right now policy that is existing and we discuss it through the lens, these 8 questions. And so we're going to get started with discussing the virtual public comment policy. So one thing that we wanted to pick that was fun about this one is, if you have been aware of city policies and programming for long enough, you will know that this policy has evolved. So in thinking about the evolution or your own participation with this policy, again, think about it through a DEIA lens. And I do just want to, for anyone who's listening, I want to reiterate that the goal of the equity framework tool for the city of Kenmore and for the Kenmore City Council is to identify and address systemic and structural barriers that perpetuate inequalities within the city and to promote equity and reduce disparities among its residents and visitors. So that's why we're doing this tonight. So if it's a bolded question, it's one that I'm going to be reading. We're going to pause, give everyone a chance to think. And then I'm hoping to hear from everyone here tonight. And if we start getting to the very last questions, I might just start staring you down if, one of you hasn't participated yet. So thinking of this virtual public comment, is my own personal experience, culture, and/or background preventing me from understanding and taking the cultural issues of marginalized stakeholders into account in deciding what issues exist for those disparately impacted? We're coming out heavy hitting. Councilmember Marshall.
Yeah, I was just thinking, how do we get more people involved? More people in different languages, if possible. Or I don't know if we even have, or we don't have sign language interpretation, that type of stuff.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. When I had some internal DEIA discussions, we mentioned the disparity between the translation ability, the translation options that we have for every other meeting except for city council meetings.
I can just jump in. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, right? I mean, there's access issues. There's a certain threshold that folks would likely need access to a device so they can log in on the internet and watch this thing to kind of virtually. There's a sort of time issue if they've got other priorities and competing obligations, et cetera, in life that might keep them from getting in before, you know, the deadline, or being able to be, I guess, online and available for the thing itself. You know, I don't issue this as a critique. I think it's more so just trade-offs and things to be aware of. But I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I won't hog all the good ones for everybody else, but yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got stuck on A as well in terms of the access issues and the technology issues. But then I was thinking about this. So this whole policy is for virtual public comment. So I mean, if a person wants to do virtual public comment, I think there is an assumption that that is their preferred mode. And so there's a technology comfort there at some level, I would assume, if that's what they want to do. So then we just need to facilitate that. I guess it's hard for me to look at this in the absence of what are all the other ways people can provide public comment. I mean, because we want to make sure that we're, you know, equally encouraging, you know, written comment, coming in person, leaving a phone message, you know, just sort of all of the other ways, email, you know, just this is not in isolation, but I mean, I know we're looking at it in isolation tonight, but I think the other thing that made me a little uncomfortable maybe was F. You know, and in general, we do ask for the person's name and city of residence. I mean, obviously, city of residence is relevant. You know, it does make me wonder, you know, do we have to have a name? I guess we do, but displaying it, you know, I don't know. It's some people, you know, have unusual names that speak to maybe their national origin or their, you know, race or religion, and I don't know. I mean, could that make someone uncomfortable? I don't know.
Tagging on that, I'm just wondering, have people been not approved? I'm just trying to think of that the criteria would be to not approve someone for public comment. It's been a while since we've done this. So I hear you, and maybe the name not seen, and then appear after approval, right? With that, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about that with what you're kind of like on a job application. My experience, you know, we no longer see the name of the person applying. We get their resume. It was an interesting thing you brought up, Deborah.
To interject, I know I can't speak for the capacity of the clerk to block names, but I do know that one of the reasons why we have, you know, so many steps to register for public comment is because of the incident last year, which is making us trying to be even more sensitive to the safety of our marginalized population. So some of these policies are a direct result of what can happen when your Zoom meetings aren't being protected.
Yeah, just a quick sort of clarifying question on F when it comes to displaying first and last name. Is it, I guess, specified whether it's legal versus preferred name on that form? Do you know? Would it be so much to just insert the preferred name on there so there's not an assumption?
I think that's a great idea. I experience it through my work regularly when we onboard people. We'll get having it be clear the preferred name is very helpful.
I mean, kind of speaking broader on, number two and biases and largely the virtual public comment policy, not maybe the specifics, but I know, the folks who run for city council and are folks who are generally available in the evenings, who are able to figure out ways to be at meetings. And I know that, before COVID hit, the assumption was that if you wanted to have your voice heard, then you should be able to get to City Hall and do that. And I think that sort of bias, I think that, gets baked into a lot of folks who run for office and get elected, because like we're all going to be here, 9 days out of 10. And it's easy for us to forget that there are other folks who have other issues going on a Monday night that may not be able to make it, even in a small town like Kenmore, make it down to City Hall to give their 3 minutes. And, that was one of the things that I really tried to remember while we were going through, allowing public comment virtually and to continue it, was that we'd really opened it up to a lot of folks who weren't able to physically make it down. And I think that was something that I tried to keep kind of centered through that conversation. And then, going to what Councilor Shedrick was saying, there are lots of other ways for folks to have their voices heard too, but it is important that folks are able to do that publicly if they want to, and to make it as easy as possible.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the next question, I wanted to note that one more piece of feedback that came in in our discussion is how the virtual public comments are mentioned among staff and city council members. It can be easy historically to say, and people calling in from home and assuming that people are making public comments from home, when really many people might be commuting, they might be outside, they may be on lunch break from work, they might be in a variety of places. And so assuming that people are at home is putting a cultural bias on what those people are doing, when really we have people zooming in from many, many spaces.
It also could be somebody who doesn't have a home.
Amen. Thank you. How has the council's past contact and involvement with marginalized stakeholder communities influenced, or how might it influence my decision-making process and findings?
This is all in context of virtual public comment. Okay.
So to lead you along, have any of you received feedback about how to make public comment more accessible, or gratitude that maybe they didn't feel comfortable or able to attend in person, and so they were really grateful the public comment existed? Or as maybe anyone from the community said, I would like to attend more, but English is my second language, any of those sort of things. I know we as committee members sometimes get this feedback, but I'm also always curious how much of that trickles up to you as council members.
This is a bit adjacent, but I have heard from several residents and community members and things. The more introverted side, the more quiet, I don't feel comfortable, a little nervous about that. I think it's generally the case that making a public comment, whether it is in person or virtually, that tends to be more impactful, right? Hearing that, and I mean, there's even biases baked into saying hearing, but I think that's in the mix, and having heard it a few times, I just wanted to elevate that a lot of folks don't feel comfortable with that. And it's good that we're offering it. It's awesome. It's great. But I think there's just a force at work there with that. So yeah.
I've heard call from people to have as many varieties of ways for people to interface as possible. So virtual among them, in person among them, coffee with council, group meetings, and yet there will always be people who, write in, which is great. I feel like we even witnessed at our public comment today, one public comment calling another public comment ridiculous. And, you know, that person who was called out in that way may choose not to return because of that. And we certainly, you know, last December had a meeting that was so vociferous and so volatile that I think many people did feel physically. So that said, also the one place we know where people are not calling in from is the library, because our meetings happen after the library has closed. So we know they're not accessing public computers. And there was one more thing. Oh, and I feel like out of the COVID pandemic really emerged a population of people who longed for ways to participate, but discovered themselves to be immune suppressed, and going out wasn't possible, and that has perpetuated. And so I'm not delighted at all with the precipitating event that caused us to do virtual comment. That was horrifying. And we do need to be cautious that we guard the clerk's ability to do their job in terms of keeping our population safe. But
We are going to piggyback these two. How am I convinced that reasonable efforts have been made in an individualized way to match the needs of the entire community, particularly marginalized populations? And have we heard from disparately impacted communities before any final determinations or decisions?
I think when it came to virtual comment, there wasn't really a process for listening about the impacts it could have or having those considerations because it was implemented so suddenly with the pandemic. And so it's now only looking back, we're reevaluating the past and we're looking, you know, sort of with this hindsight. And so that wasn't part of the discussion at the time. And you know, I think we're sort of, some of us may be in a mindset where it's wasn't the original intention for its implementation, but hey, it also does this as well, kind of. But we still haven't had those conversations, I don't think, about the impact and sort of how it should be modified and including those voices before a decision like that was made.
Yeah, I think I tag on to Councilmember Lutz's. I think neither at the beginning of the pandemic when we first developed the policy or just the practice, and then when we formalized the policy more recently with the problems that we had, I think at neither point we really did a lot of outreach because those were both very rushed decisions. We were responding to very specific external situations. So, you know, like many other policies that we have, I think they would benefit from an eye, you know, toward DEIA. I mean, maybe this is what we're doing tonight, but I you know, this and many others, I guess. Yeah.
One thing I appreciate about the virtual public comment is the evolution of it. I know Garrett has emailed this out to you, I believe multiple times. If you click on this section 2.3 and 8.2, the public comment and the public hearings, you'll see that some of these, you know, are rules of decorum, the time allotments, like some of these, how we participate in live meetings have evolved. That has also influenced how the clerks are having real public comment. I was trying to see if this was written down in policy, and it looks like it's just, you know, how the clerks have been doing it. But I've sat in some full city council meetings where a portion of the in-person comments speak, then the clerk asks for the next people on Zoom, and then there's this toggling, right? And in my understanding, that's a direct response to, oh, there's kind of some pushback when everyone who was waiting on Zoom was pushed to the end. And that's a little bit of some inadvertent systemic, like, you're just going to be the last in line if you sign up via Zoom. That's just how we do it. But my understanding is that city staff and our clerks, you know, heard this and they maneuvered. And even though it doesn't seem to be part of our official public comment policy, it is part of this, you know, flexibility that we are utilizing as we figure this out. And so I think one thing is we, in number 6, we haven't completely finalized, I think, our intersection of technology with our city council meetings, right? I'm hearing a call for what about language translations or sign language, or how could this maybe be, even if it's not offered live, or how could this be, you know, overlaid for our YouTube recordings, you know, later. So I think that's one thing when you use this toolkit, not all things are done growing. And so always look forward of how could we maybe take them to the next step for being more inclusive next.
Councilor Shrubnik?
I just had a quick thought. I mean, we've circled around it a couple different ways, but you know, we do have other ways of providing comment. We have the virtual and the in-person, and then we have all of the other things. And I guess I have a question. Maybe this is for, I don't know what this question is for. Is there a difference between a comment that is made to us as a council by email or over the phone, because we certainly get plenty of those, on a topic that's on our agenda or not, versus a virtual comment or an in-person comment? Because I think of them as identical, but then I realize, well, the other stuff isn't called public comment. So does that question make any sense? I mean, is there like a legal distinction? Is there a documentary distinction? Like, I mean, because everything is public record.
I mean, if I could jump in really quickly.
Yeah,
I've seen,
okay.
because I watch a lot of other cities' meetings, and there are other cities where, you know, the emails that are sent into council members are compiled as part of like, kind of like what we did with the public hearings, you know, where they compile all of that. They may have just, here are the emails that the council's received over the last week, and it's just published in the back of the minutes or something like that. So I have seen that done. But you know, the other part of your question, I think, comes down to how we each individually, you know, how in-person versus virtual versus an email versus all of that, how each of us interpret that individually. I think that's.
Well, and do people who just write us an email or phone want to be part of the, you know, larger public record too? You know, I mean, I think that, I don't know, it's an interesting question or just thought exercise.
Okay, 7 and 8. Again, we're going to piggyback. I know we are all, it's the end of the day. The sun is setting. How has this decision going to how is this decision going to specifically impact marginalized people? Have we considered how to mitigate harmful results? And have we sacrificed the experience of marginalized people for the comfort and safety of those holding privilege, the majority population, and or stakeholders not negatively impacted?
I mean, I would argue that opening up virtual comment has kind of undermined, frankly, you know, at least from what I've heard from some folks, kind of the experience, I guess, for some of the people who are used to coming in person or used to that being the default. You know, they don't feel sometimes like the people who are on Zoom are maybe not as passionate, or maybe not as, not willing to make the sacrifice to be down here or something like that. And I think that's malarkey, but, to quote our president, or baloney, I guess. But, you know, so on some level, we have made it, you know, it was kind of we've given up, I think, some of the privilege that folks had who were able to make it here in person in order to level the playing field a bit. And for some folks, when you level the playing field, when they're used to having a little bit of privilege, it feels like they're losing something when they're not. You know, it's not a zero-sum game, but I think some folks kind of view it that way.
Honestly, I'm finding that 5 and 6 are still really giving me trouble. How am I convinced that reasonable efforts? I can't answer that except for my trust in staff and, you know, I hear all the time, well, the newsletter, you know, the online newsletter doesn't get, people don't look at it. I don't know the answer to this. These get me. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, as I said at the beginning, these are not yes or no questions. These are those introspective questions that you keep rolling over again and over and again and over again. Jump ahead. Again, let's try to think of the long journey of how public comment has evolved. Are there strategies to mitigate unintended consequences? What have those looked like here?
So, yeah, I was very impressed with staff and the clerk in responding very quickly to the attack on everybody. I guess it hits it like much different ways, right? Just control, your sense of propriety, the sense of dignity of the proceedings. And then there's the specific bigoted insults that came out that were just aimed with venom. And then that was hitting in every way. And so that would be, in a way, it's to be expected, unfortunately, to some extent. But I guess it would be an unintended consequence of saying, we're going to open this up. This is public comment to like a wide variety of people. And the strategy that was used was a vigorous and firm one to crush that type of bigoted intrusion, which was in compliance with the law too. It's like, we're going to make you, you're going to have to identify who you are, and we're going to have to know who you are. And hopefully that provides some deterrence. So that's a strategy I saw as mitigating one unintended consequence.
Well, and to add on to that, to make it safe for everybody else to feel comfortable making both virtual and public comment, to know that they're not going to have to, you know, kind of experience that. I mean, it was pretty toxic. So, yeah.
I think a possible unintended consequence of the pre-registration seems to me, and this is my own gut telling me, but it seems like we have less online commenters nowadays. And it seemed a time with that pre-registration. I don't know, maybe the clerk can confirm or deny my gut feeling, but yeah, it just seems like that could be an unintended consequence. Yes, we want to make it safe, and yes, we want to guard against the attacks, but maybe at the expense of less people registering and doing online comments.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And it's unfortunate, really, because there are people who find out about things at the last minute and they're not able to make a public comment for any number of reasons. So I do think that's an unfortunate consequence. I recognize where it came from in the controls that were put in place. Sometimes you wonder, is this an over control for one instance when freedom of speech in our nation is so important? Fortunately, we are still getting virtual public comment, but yeah, that it is, I personally think it's a barrier. I can say that. I think it's a barrier. I think freedom of speech is really important. it's really sad when a bad egg puts a controller limitation on so many.
Yeah, I think just to add off of that, I had a similar thought too, having that, noon deadline or whatever it is the day of, that say somebody wasn't expecting to be free and then is suddenly free that evening and they want to contribute and comment, but now they've missed the deadline, so they're not able to participate in the public meeting, which I think is really important. It's just trying to find that balance. But another thing that at least crossed my mind when considering this question is, how do you know the unintended consequences to mitigate if you haven't gone through steps 5 and 6 and actually reached out to those communities to hear? I mean, we might not be hearing of any consequences, but that's because those barriers are already in place and we haven't done the proper outreach, and that construct is already there, and so it's hard to know what to mitigate when the system's already in place and not able to hear from the group that might be at the other end of those unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And I think ideally, we have a system in place where leaders are doing outreach, and also in a perfect community, our vulnerable populations are feeling comfortable enough to do the talking as well. So it goes both ways, right? It goes the outreach and the, hey, this isn't working for me. I'm raising my hand with a red flag.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, we have the data, right? We could look at, what did the virtual comment look like before? What did it look like after? Of course, the issues change over time too, so it's hard to equate it completely. But, if we did see a significant fall off, particularly a fall off if it also intersected with, a diversity of opinions being elicited, I think that would be problematic. I was very uncomfortable with the pre-registration. I still am. I think a lot of people are, read things at the last minute and decide whether they have an opinion that they want to share at that point. Afternoon on the day of. And so I do think we've created a barrier for sure. So I'd love to softly reconsider it at some point, and maybe after the novelty of Zoom bombing has worn off. And so anyway.
I think that's a good point. I do want to just remind us that we created the barrier on purpose to prevent what is likely a, sort of a cyber bot attack. We don't necessarily think that those were even individuals or residents. I mean, residents can still call up and say whatever they want as long as they've passed over the barrier. But is there a point at which we relax, which not just us, but many, many, many other cities experience, that we relax and let that down and see what happens?
And I might also add that correlation is not always causation too. We've seen it actually at previous meetings where a lot of folks who were doing a lot of virtual comment have now gotten more comfortable with coming into City Hall and doing comment in person. And I think we're going to see, especially with, various COVID spikes and things like that, I think we're going to see kind of wave, we're going to see surges of virtual comment, and then it'll surge down. I could be wrong, but I think a lot of people are becoming more comfortable with going into public spaces, whether right or wrong. And and also, previous to a couple of years ago, public comment was sometimes just nobody or one person. So, things have changed drastically. So I think it's kind of hard to compare over time, just because the dynamics of everything have changed so much.
I'd say that if you do feel like you've hit kind of this crux of we're as inclusive as we can, but we have some safety barriers, and we're feeling like there's people that are maybe caught in the weeds, then look adjacently to what are your other ways what are their other access points, and how do we amplify those and catch those same people? right? Do this exact same discussion with email and with the voice memo. Do they know that they can leave you messages? How long are those messages? When do you check them? Will they expect a call back? Do you expect, do an email? Do this exact same exercise with all of their other access points to you? Final question, who will benefit and be burdened by your decisions about your public comment policy? You can go as micro or big and meta with this as you want.
I think we hit a lot of it, good points from people who don't have access to the computers. Could they benefit by having it at the library or other access? People who have to get home, people who decide later than our deadlines if they want to do it. Some of those ideas.
I think a good thing is most people have phones or access to a phone or a person with a phone. So it's fortunate that technology has expanded to a place where someone isn't requiring a full computer, which is an expensive item. Even when it might not be apparent, but when I got divorced, buying a computer was really hard. Even 5 years later, it was not an easy thing to do. So, access to that, but I had to have a phone, even if it was a burner or something, I mean, I had I'm just explaining in a little bit more detail. So I think it's fortunate technology has moved to a place where online is, in a sense, way more accessible than maybe 15 years ago when you would have had to have a computer. So that's good news. I think I was thankful for Councilmember Shrevenick's comments. And I think many of us felt it. I heard Councilmember Lutz's, that piece about access through the screening system that we're doing is a burden for some. I think it's a big one.
Well, that's all I've got. So I just want to thank you all for your time and for your continued support for the DEIA committee. As City Council, City Manager said, we meet quarterly, but we email, and Garrett's always keeping us in the loop and pestering us with questions. It's an honor to present to you tonight. Thank you for all that you do. And I just want to give a shout out that it was really fun for us to brainstorm the virtual public comment, because it really is the intersection of so many access, health, ability, and safety issues. So please keep thinking about this toolkit, apply this to everything else that you do, and thank you so much for your time this night.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And if I could just, so this equity toolkit, you should have laminated copies in your drawers in the dais. And if you don't, just see the city clerk and we can get you a replacement copy. Yeah. And thank you so much, Juliana. Well done. And thanks to you and the entire committee for all you do.
Thank you. Final staff report, website accessibility tool demonstration, presented by Assistant to the City Manager and DIA Coordinator Garrett Oppenheim.
Thank you. This one I promise is going to be pretty quick. I just want to show you guys this tool that is very cool that we have on the website. Okay, good. You can all see it. So down here in the bottom right corner, you see this accessibility menu, this orange icon. If you click on that, you get all these really cool options for accessibility things. The first one at the top is the most obvious. Actually, no, I'm going to go to the DEI page. I think that's a great one to use as an example. So I have to open the accessibility menu again. But I can go up here, I can click on English, and then I have just myriad options of languages that we can translate this into. So for instance, Czech. I click on that and instantaneously everything gets translated into Czech. I can click on it again. We want to see it in Chinese. Go back to English for a second, and then it all translates into Chinese. And I can do that with any language on here. So Hebrew. And you see also that on the accessibility menu, all of these things are now in a different language. So I'm going to turn that off so I can show off some of those features, because I don't know what any of them mean in Hebrew right now. So now we're back in English. So we have, oh gosh, I think 15 or so different features here that people can use. We have a screen reader. And it changes pace, but I'm just gonna leave it on normal now. So if you do that and then you click on like a paragraph, it should read it. I don't know if it's gonna work right now. It'll be here, but I can't hear. The sound might be off. I don't know. I'm gonna switch to one of the others. Contrast changes it so that depending on your vision, this might look better, easier for you to look at. It can highlight the links so you can see just specifically where things are that you can click on and go to another page. We can increase the size of the font on here. It has 4 levels, and then we can go back down to the beginning. Text spacing moves the letters farther apart, so they might be easier to read. See up here, we have some pictures. We can hide those. Dyslexia friendly changes the way the font looks. I'm not dyslexic, so I don't know how that improves it, but it must make it easier to read. And then you can see there's just other ones. There's a dictionary, so if you don't know a word, you can just double click it and then definition comes up. That's really all there is. It's just a really cool tool. Anybody accessing the website is just right there and available.
That's pretty amazing.
So that's all I have on that one. But thank you again. It's been great to be able to do this diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility themed evening here tonight. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work. Appreciate it. Any further staff report? All right. Council member reports and comments. Councilmember Culver.
Yeah, got a few things tonight. So I want to thank members of the community who spoke up tonight about the need to declare a climate emergency. I think it's appreciated and warranted. At our last meeting, we heard from staff that we are having a challenge in directing the necessary resources to tackle a clearly understood emergency and our collectively identified #1 priority, climate. I'm ready to try something different to address it. And in response to my colleagues asking for specifics, here's a great place to start. I believe it's time for Kenmore City Council to declare a climate emergency. This is a public health emergency, global in scale. Heat-related deaths hit an all-time high last year. This emergency requires an all-of-government scale response, and we are part and parcel and constituent of that. Kenmore is 6 square miles, and Kenmore should take responsibility for its 6 square miles accordingly. And in these ever-polarized times, the good news is that across the political spectrum, climate action is more popular than might be outwardly obvious. 70 to 80% say the government should do more, and 60% want local officials specifically to do more. That's us, and we can clearly do more. Declaring a climate emergency is our logical next step. And when we do so, we will be among excellent company of regional cities, including Shoreline, Redmond, Bainbridge Island, Everett, Olympia, Tacoma, and many others. Colleagues, we should join them. We've deliberated and concluded that climate is our #1 priority. With assigning that level of importance, let's walk the talk and mean what we say to ensure that our words matter. Still, if any observers might reasonably wonder whether this issue right now, does climate really meet that high bar of formally declaring an emergency, it might be helpful to reflect on a handful of emergencies the Kenmore City Council has declared in years past, including in 1998, an emergency establishing a development permit fee structure. In 2002, an emergency establishing a moratorium on satellite locations for off-track horse race betting. In 2002, an emergency establishing a moratorium on major and minor communication facilities. In 2007, an emergency establishing a maximum building height of 35 feet on 181st Street between 61st and 65th Avenue. And in 2010, an emergency extending its cable television franchise with Comcast of Washington for 6 months, quote, necessary for the protection of public health and safety and welfare. I hope this context, these historical norms, was helpful for understanding how our betters have responded to the threats of days past. And staring down this present day threat, let us match that leadership and answer this moment with forthright courage. As a council, let's step up and formally declare a climate emergency. I would kindly ask for a second.
second.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second then. Let's have some discussion then on the motion. This wouldn't be to declare emergency, but this would be to add this to a future agenda, just to be clear. On this, Councilmember Marshall.
Thanks, yeah. Whoops. Yeah, future agenda is definitely the way to go on it, because I think we do need to have more public input, and of course, would need to look at the text of any proposal that comes before us well in advance and any other implications. I'm interested in it. I don't feel that it is an urgency. Declaring an emergency in and of itself, I am reassured by what we've done with our climate action plan and this concrete steps, the walk. I believe we are walking regardless of such a declaration. But if we can do it efficiently, you know, I'm probably not going to be terribly opposed to it, depending upon what goes down. Thanks.
All right, Deputy Mayor, then Councilmember Sassen, then Councilmember Shribnick.
Yeah, I think it would be great to bring back for discussion. And one of the key things, and I appreciated that at least one of our community members, if not two, use the term environmental and climate emergency declaration. I think it's important to connect the two, especially when a great deal of the work that we are doing is environmental first, boots on the ground, related to the environment. So I think it would be great to bring back for conversation. I'm curious just when staff or when we're able to bring this back, what a declaration like this does for our community, as Councilmember Marshall may have kind of drawn attention to. I think it's an important conversation, and I'm hopeful we can make some action on it. Thank you.
Councilor Sassen.
I benefited this evening from the comments from our residents. It really helped me to clarify and frame the request. And I appreciate Councilmember Culver for bringing it up. And I also really appreciate your comments. Councilmember Marshall, I did have the opportunity during some comments to pull up the declaration for both Redmond and Portland. And that was really the motivation for me to, I appreciated hearing that they existed, and I appreciated being able to skim the content of those. That was convincing to me that we are enough on the right track that we're not going to be reinventing the wheel for.
Councilor Shribnick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, in 2018, when I started working on this issue and then brought it to the retreat in 2019 for approval to move forward with the climate action work. I thought it was an emergency then. I still do. It's more obvious now than it was then. That said, I feel like actions speak louder than words. And I guess my question, I'm fine with having the discussion. My preference would be to spend our time on action rather than words. But I'm okay with having the discussion. I would want to know what a proclamation actually does. For example, when the president declares an emergency, or when a state requests an emergency declaration after a disaster, it releases funds. What I don't see when I look at declarations at the city level is that direct response. And so I guess at minimum, I would want this discussion to be in tandem with our budget process, because otherwise there's a big disconnect between words and action.
Councilor Lucis.
Councilmember Shribnick actually raised the same point I had, was what does a declaration do? Is it just procedural? Is it just words? Does it actually help further what we're trying to accomplish? That being said, I still fully support the mission and project and everything. And I just, for lack of my own knowledge, a little more curious about what a city declaration of an emergency would look like and actually mean. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm totally open to a discussion here. I have some of the same questions that Councilor Shrubnik has around, I've never been, and this is, I realize, one of my weaknesses. I've never been huge on just pure symbolism. You know, I understand where it has its place, but I do worry about doing things for purely symbolic purposes when it doesn't actually result in anything concrete happening. I'm just flipping through like Shoreline's declaration right now, and there's actually some interesting stuff in there as far as their directions that they give staff for kind of what they want to do with building energy and transportation and all that sort of stuff. You know, so I would be actually curious to learn more about what city declarations of emergency do. I think those are a little different than what Councilmember Culver was bringing up previously, where sometimes a ordinance may have an emergency declaration on it to make it go into effect quicker, or may justify a moratorium or something like that. That's a little different than emergency declaration. So I'm curious kind of what, like, I'd like to learn more about the city powers around emergency declarations and what the actual outcomes are from it, and what we could get as a city, or not what we could get as a city, but what it would, if it would open up any opportunities or have a concrete effect beyond what we're already doing with our climate action plan. But I'm open to the discussion for sure. Deputy Mayor?
And I just want to be clear that when I said, what does this do for our city? I was alluding to the things that Councilmember Shrubnik and Lutzis and our mayor just brought up. When I made that comment, it was like, what does this bring us? And why I wanted staff to be able to bring that back to us. But my next question is more around when, timing. Is this for, you know, there's a motion and a second to vote on this tonight? Is it a motion and a second to vote on it to bring back for us to have a discussion? I could see it in addition to being a topic for review at a budget meeting. I actually could see it as a good conversation with our, oh shoot, I forgot the name of the title for next week's discussion, our council priorities. And I personally think it would fit within the council priorities conversation potentially. So that's my question for council. As far as where we are, it's clear that we're all interested in this conversation.
I mean, I think next week's conversation, I'll defer to council, the city manager if I'm wrong, but I think it's more of a framing of, we have these priorities, then what does delivering on those look like from a staff perspective? I don't think we're revisiting priorities or digging into individual actions within priorities. We're just trying to, you know, lay out the groundwork for what staff is, so staff has clear expectations. Is that correct on what we're talking about next week?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, and yeah, we're not voting on anything right now. The question right now is just, I'm trying to establish whether we have consensus to add it to a future agenda. I feel like there probably is consensus to have an ongoing discussion. Okay, we have consensus. So yeah, we will add this to a future agenda. I'm going to defer a little bit to staff as far as timing goes, because things are packed. Things are packed so much that we're adding a September dinner meeting. It sounds like you'll all find out about that as soon as things are finalized on a Wednesday. So we'll need to figure out where that gets slotted in with everything else, and staff will need time to actually, I think, do some research work on, you know, what city declarations mean and what our powers are in that and all of that, because I think, I'm assuming you don't know off the top of your head and all of the ins and outs around that. So can we, it sounds like, you know, there's consensus here. Can we defer to staff on when exactly this is scheduled in, as long as it's, you know, I would say pre-budget at the latest?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Does that work?
Works for me. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, fantastic.
Cool. Well, building on that, I do hear maybe some disagreement about the path forward with climate, which is fine and good and normal. Reasonable minds differ, as we've discussed at some length tonight. Fortunately, there are more tools in the tool belt for working through those points of disagreement. With that in mind, and with the support of the community, we will be launching a climate initiative to do what we feel is necessary to meet this threat, this emergency head on. Council will have the opportunity to pass it as is if council deems that's a conversation they would like to have. But otherwise, this meeting, this microphone, these are all public facilities, so I will not be using them to support the passage of any ballot measure. So that is all I have to share in this venue. Thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
So this applies to myself foremost, and I urge everybody, I will repeat it again needlessly, to urge everyone to omit needless words in terms of efficiency of carrying out our meetings. Applying myself foremost. We had a great 4th of July celebration. Thank you to the staff. It was awesome. There were tons of people down there. The display was amazing. I am normally very skeptical of much publicity or the need for it, but I was pleased to see that we got good coverage in the Shoreline News, I think it was. And a buddy of mine who lives in Lake Forest Park just sent it to me and said, wow, look at this. And Kenmore Council unanimously passes opposition to the initiatives against the climate. So I thought that was cool. And then for the first time, we rented kayaks. My family rented kayaks from the Whatsup and then paddled around and went up to Tla Aguadis and back, and it was amazing. Amazing resource we have here, and amazing foresight for our prior councils in the city and the staff and everybody to have pushed the walkways and waterways and the citizens to have approved it. Amazing.
Councilor Sassen.
I also had a great time at the fireworks. I just want to speak to the delight that is Coffee with Council. I am the standing Monday morning person. So anybody out there who doesn't want to see me, don't come to the Monday morning council meeting. The Monday morning coffee, but I learn something each time, and I'm just pleased to participate. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I had a particularly fun time at the fireworks. I got to do the countdown and it was super fun. I just have to say that. I hope we rotate that responsibility because it's pretty cool. I think it's because Nigel and Melanie were not available. And I've also spent some quality time at Log Boom, and along with a ton of other people really enjoying the park, and it just does my heart good. It's just delightful to see. And I just want to recognize, I don't think I did this last week, but maybe we did, or last time, that Racer had their 5-year, did we already talk about this? Their 5-year anniversary. I can't remember if we talked about that, but I just want to underscore that. I'm trying to remember, Rob, if there was anything earth shattering from that meeting. I don't think there was from the most recent meeting, but.
So the board meeting you're talking about?
Yeah.
They are proposing an increase in the budget, including the addition of a supervisor position and.
Right, they will come to us with some revised budget figures, which we kind of knew was coming.
Yes.
So, yeah, other than that, and then supposedly sometime this month, the Crisis Care Center, I think, is still slated to open. We haven't heard about the grand opening, but
I haven't heard any difference.
Okay,
Yeah.
so hopefully that will happen too. To me, those things, Racer and the Crisis Care Center, kind of go hand in hand.
For sure. Yeah.
Councilor Lucis.
Not much to say. It was a great fireworks show. Thank you, Councilmember Srebnick, for doing the countdown. And thank you to our staff for helping this meeting to run smoothly and for all they do for our city. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Just running on my closing topic lately, we had a really big week politically in our nation. And I just want to remind us in conjunction with this DEIA conversation to see each other with humanity. We have neighbors, friends, family who may have differing opinions than us about the state of our nation and who's running for what. And at least from my experience, it's been a very tense week. one that's triggered me in ways that I didn't expect, and I know that I probably am not alone. So I just want to remind you, fill your cup. Remember to see the humanity in your neighbor, because we're here to work together and do good things for the city of Kenmore, and we fit into the whole of our nation. So really just move forward with as much compassion as you can. Thank you.
And I just have one thing that I want to flag for folks and see if we can find somebody who. So I got an invitation from Executive Constantine to attend what he's calling, and the invite comes from him, Mayor Bruce Harrell, and David Hoffman from SCA. It says they're convening a conversation with mayors and key municipal leaders to reflect on lessons learned in the last 5 years of KCRHA. As much as I would love to be in that meeting, I have a wild conflict of interest as I work at KCRHA, so I cannot attend, even though I would love to be a fly on the wall. The email goes on to say that it says the invitation is non-transferable, so if you're unable to attend but would like to designate another elected official from your city to attend, you need to reach out to the deputy executive, and they're asking for RSVPs by this Friday. So nobody is guaranteed that they will be able to go, but since we're here, I wanted to ask folks, the meeting is Tuesday, the 23rd, from 9:30 to 2 with lunch provided downtown. My initial thought was Councilmember Sassen, given her role with, I think it's Noosa and the other, yeah, but sounds like running till 2 might be a problem for you. That probably wouldn't be a problem. Actually, it made sense. Does that work for you? Okay. Then I will put in the ask then to the executive's office, and I'll let you know what I hear back from them. So, and I don't have anything further, so nothing more before us. We are adjourned.